let you know about that. The next slide is...
Christine, that is your 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Good enough. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Becky Rapp. Becky, you can start when ready.
Good evening. My name is Becky Rapp. I'm a parent and a youth group mentor, and I've been paying close attention to the Measure H ordinance, and a close reading, I noticed the implementation finds that there aren't any separation requirements between marijuana businesses and churches. So it's very possible that a marijuana outlet could locate next door to a church. Churches across the county have been tirelessly fighting to protect their congregations from the normalcy and commercialization of marijuana, and protect their families who utilize the church sites for childcare from being next door to a marijuana outlet or other businesses, including the dangerous manufacturing sites that use volatile and toxic chemicals. Churches are also a place that often distribute food, clothing, and housing to families and their children. It seems that in the spirit of sensitive uses mentioned in Measure H, that churches could be included. Although I know that Measure H's wording can't be changed, it seems completely within the purview of Encinitas to have a list of sensitive uses that it would want to be protected. Our coalition of churches wonders if Encinitas Municipal Code could be augmented to protect the religious community as the sensitive use it most certainly is. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Terry Ann Skelly. Let's see if she's there. I do not see her on the line.
I can try unmuting the phone numbers that called in.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure who those are. Terry Ann Skelly, are you present? Okay, we'll move to our next speaker, Mark Wilcox. Mark, you can start when ready.
There, is that good?
Good
evening, Mayor. Yeah, good evening, Mayor Blakespear and City Council members. The news from Canada should give the City Council pause and serious concern as it deals with marijuana businesses applying to operate in Encinitas. Canada has a huge surplus of marijuana, and its firms are currently warehousing 1.1 billion grams of harvested cannabis that can't be sold because the market is saturated. We know that the California market is saturated as well, and some 5 to 10 times the amount of marijuana grown in California ships somewhere else in the United States and outside the United States. The factors blamed for the collapsing marijuana market and imprudent investments are: 1, permitting of growers and manufacturers beyond the number necessary; 2, long-standing pre-existing networks for moving drugs that continued operating outside the permitting system; 3, the rush into the marijuana marketplace with false hopes of making a killing, another Ponzi scheme of pot; 4, personal at-home marijuana cultivation whose harvests enter the marketplace. In California, all persons can grow up to 6 pounds in a continuous manner. 5, and most interesting, Health Canada highlighted recent police raids and arrests and production sites where people were using their registered legal permits to cover and support large-scale illegal production and sale. Another example that California knows well: legal permitted pot sold out the front door and black market pot peddled out the back door. My recommendation is a strong law enforcement presence should be part of the vetting and implementation process in Encinitas for marijuana business applicants. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Peggy Walker. Peggy, you can start when ready.
Hi, good evening. Oops. Sorry about that. I came to the council to call attention to an interesting yet disturbing mailer delivered to Encinitas mailboxes recently. It advertises on-demand marijuana delivery services of over 400 products within an hour. The ad is designed around the face of a young model who looks like a teen. First of all, this makes me wonder, are these mailers legal? The state outlaws marketing that in any way is designed to appeal to youth under 21, and this one does. Second, the ad said delivery would come from a business in the city of Commerce. So I have to ask, do we? And if so, why allow businesses outside of Encinitas to deliver here? I didn't find reference to this in the municipal code, but I urge you, as you draft Metro H's ordinance, to outlaw deliveries and advertising from out-of-town sellers. Poway, Escondido, San Marcos, and Carlsbad have done so. I want to share also that this issue is more troublesome considering that big corporate pot businesses are beginning now to create special regional delivery hubs. One under the name Caliva was just launched in Chula Vista. It provides on-demand, direct-to-consumer delivery orders anywhere, thereby circumventing local retail outlets. Caliva allows you to pre-order on a daily or weekly basis, offers a loyalty rewards program, and digital contactless payment to attract customers. This would make it easy to circumvent city regulation, tax revenues, and daily limits unless it's addressed or banned in the municipal code. Plus, nothing could make it more easy for the underage to access marijuana. So I just want to ask, please consider measures to ban all out-of-town delivery businesses and their advertising. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tyler James. Tyler, you can start when ready.
Good evening. My name is Tyler James. The City Council has taken a stand for public health by banning the sale of flavored tobacco products. I urge you to enact a similar ban on the sale of flavored marijuana. It is widely recognized that flavors attract kids into using highly addictive e-cigarettes. Proof is in the large number of teens who vape flavored e-liquids with names like strawberry shortcake, blue raz cotton candy, and gummy bear. It's no coincidence the marijuana industry is using the same strategy. Tobacco giant Altria is a major player with a multi-billion-dollar investments in all levels of marijuana industry, from farms to the final product. Altria is the maker of Marlboro cigarettes, among others, and owns Juul, the company largely credited with launching the teen vaping epidemic. Tobacco companies have decades of experience in creating addictive products and youth-oriented marketing campaigns. That same strategy is evident in the marijuana marketplace. The class action lawsuits in the 1980s confirmed that tobacco companies intentionally studied the habits and preferences of teens and designed products to be addictive. It's important to add marijuana e-liquids commonly contain 80 to 90% pure THC, which is also addictive and can lead to serious mental health disorders, especially when used by people under the age of 25. Flavored marijuana should not be held or should be held to the same standard as flavored tobacco. Under the language of Measure H, the council is allowed to enact such a ban. Thank you.
Excuse me. Our next speaker is Karina Gonzalez. Karina, are you speaking under oral communications or just on item 10A?
Hi, I'm just speaking on item 10A.
Okay, thank you. I'll call you during that item. And the same question for Dr. Angie Neeson. Angie, are you just speaking on item 10A? Dr. Angie Neeson, if you're there, are you speaking under oral communications as well as item 10A or just item 10A?
Hey, Elliot. Hi.
Hi, are you speaking on just on item 10A or also under oral communication?
Just 10A.
Okay, I'll call you during that time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Donna Westbrook. And Kieran, can you unmute the two phone lines? We'll see. Donna, are you present? Donna Westbrook? Okay, Donna is not present. And then our final speaker is Aaron.
Someone unmuted from the phone line.
Donna?
I'm not getting any audio.
Donna, are you there? Give him a minute. Can you unmute?
I see one that's unmuted, but there's just no
There's no sound.
audio coming
Okay.
from it. Yeah.
I guess we'll move to our next speaker, Aaron McNally.
Good evening, and thank you for hearing me, City Council. My biggest concerns regarding block freight are food access, transportation, and transparency. More than 42 million people in the United States experience food insecurity. According to an article by KPBS, Coastal Roots, a local farm who offers pay what you can pricing, said that during COVID, 1/3 of their produce was donated before the pandemic, and that grew to 2/3. In my local Buy Nothing group, competition for CSA box produce food is fierce. We would like to think that our neighbors aren't struggling, but many of them are. Income, transportation, and other physical or structural barriers impede people from their right to nutrient-dense food. An article from Streets blog speculates that people's access to food may be car-dependent because of developmental patterns that spread grocery stores too far apart. Transportation systems that don't provide good access via transit, biking, or walking, and the nature of carrying groceries, especially if you have lots of shopping to do in one trip. It's probably a combination of all three, they conclude. Unquestionably, my biggest gripe with block freight is that it is replacing a grocery store without a new one being put in downtown Encinitas. I am concerned about how flock freight impacts the walkability of grocery stores. Walkability has been a focus of this council and was one of the reasons I voted for Mayor Blakespear and Councilmember Hinsey. Some of our neighboring cities, San Diego, Chula Vista, and Carlsbad, are tied for the 7th most polluted cities in the United States because of ozone emissions. Trucks, cars, and factories are responsible. Ozone is most dangerous and worst for people with asthma, kids, and the elderly, and worst on hot days, which without change, we're likely to have more of. Although we don't have many factories in Encinitas, I imagine most of us who have the privilege to drive. In the county, especially in North County, our lacking public transit infrastructure is continually problematic. A 20-minute round-trip drive within Encinitas frequently took 3 hours of my day on public transit because of the infrequency and lack of coverage by the bus. People need to be able to get to and from work without relying on cars and meet their basic necessities like getting groceries, medical care, and recreation without cars. I know Mayor Blakespear knows this because of the recent publicity with Sandag, yay, and an Instagram post almost a year ago in which she wrote that she championed people to, quote, get out of their cars and walk or bike, end quote. Having a grocery store walkable or rollable is imperative if we truly want to reduce car use. While block freight may cut trucking emissions for products like disposable razors and rosewater elixirs, it does so at the expense of residents trying to get their basic necessities met without depending on a car. I truly hope that Mayor Blakespear and City Council have seen the forest through the trees, and the climate benefit of a successful flock freight will outweigh the human cost. The timing of flock freight being announced right before City Council took summer recess concerns me. I would also like to mention that since writing the change.org petition, my accounts have been relentlessly attacked by malicious entities and some compromised, a problem I've been privileged to not experience until last month. Is this a democracy that we progressives are fighting for? Harassing citizens who don't agree with us? Without expectation or an agenda to change a decision that has already been made, my hope is that the residents of Encinitas be included in the future design of the city instead of decisions being made like the biggest yet moving to Encinitas and us finding out later. I hope that we can enact zoning laws that protect our neighborhood amenities like grocery stores. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And then let's just try the one phone number that was unmuting, Donna Westbrook. Donna, is that Donna Westbrook?
Yeah, this is Scott Malloy. I'm actually waiting for item 10A. So
Okay, that's not you. How about the other caller?
I'm waiting for 10A.
10A. Okay, Donna Westbrook is not on the line. So that does conclude oral communications.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I just had two quick things I wanted to mention. So the first one is about flock freight. So the City Council did not and has not made a decision about flock freight because that's a private lease negotiation that doesn't have anything to do with the city. So the existing zoning on that parcel remains the same, which is it has to be visitor serving commercial on the street side, the 101 side, but then the back side can be offices according to the existing zoning in the old Whole Foods building. So this is not a decision that City Council has made or will make. That's what's existing. And then the other thing is I wanted to say thank you to Christine for all the work on the e-bikes topic. I know that my daughter has a friend who started 8th grade at Oakcrest, and there was so much traffic congestion that she came home from school and her dad said, "You're going to have to get yourself an e-bike because I'm not going through all that traffic congestion to get you to school every day." So I know that the e-bike discussions and how to ride safely need to continue, and I'm grateful for the commitment there. So with that, I think we did not have closed session, and so we will move on to our consent calendar.
Yes, there are no changes to the posted agenda. And regarding the consent calendar, there was just one item, which was going to be Donna Westbrook, but she doesn't appear to be on the line.
Okay, I would entertain a motion on consent calendar.
So moved, Mosca.
I'll second Lines.
Okay, Councilmember Hinsey?
Yes.
Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Krantz?
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Now we're on to 10A. And how many public comments do we have on this?
On 10A, we have 20.
Okay. Well, should we have our staff report first?
Yes, since it's a public hearing, we'll do the staff report. And then after the staff report, preliminary questions from the city council. And then you can open the public hearing for public comment.
Okay.
Great. So let's do that.
All right, let me get it set up. Okay, can you all see the title slide? Take that as a yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Hear and see you.
All right, great. This is item 10A. My name is Crystal Nahara. I'm the Sustainability Manager for the city. Item 10A is on the proposed green building ordinance. It's ordinance number 2021-13. And the recommended actions tonight are to open the public hearing and then to introduce the ordinance. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of background. This item is coming to you as due to the fact that the city has an adopted climate action plan. It was adopted in January 2018 and then further updated in November 2020. And this pie chart here shows our emissions baseline. This is the proportion of greenhouse gas emissions that comes from our community. The baseline year was 2012. And for this ordinance, we're focusing on our buildings in Encinitas. And our building emissions largely come from electricity and natural gas. So that's the blue piece of the pie and the teal piece of the pie there. So that's what we'll be focusing on tonight. And the measures that relate to our buildings in Encinitas are here. These are the 5 climate action plan measures that have been folded into the ordinance. I'll start with BE1. BE stands for building efficiency. So BE1, it relates to residential energy efficiency, and it would affect retrofit or remodeled or altered buildings that are existing but are getting revised and coming to the city for a request for a building permit. BE2 relates to residential decarbonization or electrification, and this would affect just new buildings. BE3 relates to commercial energy efficiency, and again, that's just retrofit buildings. And then BE4 is commercial decarbonization, and that's for just new buildings. And then lastly, RE3, RE stands for renewable energy, and that relates to commercial solar photovoltaic systems. And then this portion of the ordinance would affect new and retrofit buildings, or the measure was identified to focus on new and retrofit buildings. So moving on, this is the ordinance development process that staff went through. We started off with an understanding that what we have as a baseline here in Encinitas, like all other cities, is we follow the California Energy Efficiency Standards and Green Building Codes called Title 24. And that's what we have currently adopted in our Encinitas Municipal Code and what we review building permit requests by. And so what the 5 climate action plan measures have directed is that we adjust these codes and establish REACH codes that go a little bit further than what's currently stated required by the state, and to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our community. So what we've proposed tonight is this local REACH code and the ordinance, and one of the state requirements to adopt a REACH code is that it must be cost effective for the applicant to implement the requirements. So throughout this process, we've ensured that the requirements that are within the ordinance are cost effective. We've identified the studies that were able to demonstrate that. There were 3 studies that were done on a statewide level that had components relevant to our climate zone here in Encinitas. And then 1 study was done by the city of Carlsbad that we were able to leverage. And the next big part of the process was to conduct public workshops. We conducted 2 public workshops in the spring. And then we also formed a stakeholder committee that was composed of 13 members of the public. Those were from various, they were members that had various interests, including some business owners, some developers, some environmental advocates, some that were just residents, and some that participated just more kind of generally ad hoc. And then we also had 2 environmental commissioners that participated in that committee. And that committee took a deeper dive on the support of drafting the ordinance. They were expected to attend and participate in 2 in-depth meetings and also review material in advance and provide comments on some of the proposed requirements that we were looking at. And then finally, once we had the ordinance drafted, we took it to, we held a 20-day public comment period and took some final comments from the public that were evaluated and considered for incorporation into the draft. And then at the very end, we took that final draft to Environmental Commission for review. And ultimately, the Environmental Commission did recommend that council adopts the ordinance. They did request 1 minor change, which staff did change in the final version that you're seeing here tonight. That minor change that was requested was related to the exception 5 to the all-electric construction of new buildings component. And with that, move on to the next slide. One thing I wanted to mention that came out of this public input that we received was the city does have a green building incentive program. The current program offers rebates for project applicants that get a LEED certification for their building or a Build It Green certification. That's a $2,000 rebate that the applicant would get if they go to actually complete the certification. But we learned through the process that program seems to be underutilized, and we might be able to revise the program and focus on more of an item-based rebate. This was something that we heard from the public, and that if we go with this item-based option, we might actually see greater reductions in emissions and greater adoption of electric appliances. So this is something staff will continue to evaluate and then bring back to council with a proposal for revisions as we evaluate it further. And so next I want to move on and transfer to my partner at the Energy Policy Initiative Center, Scott Anders. He's the director there, and he's going to go over the Green Building Ordinance in more detail, each of the different components.
Great, thanks, Crystal, and good evening, Mayor Blakespear and council members. As Crystal mentioned, I'm Scott Anders, Director of the Energy Policy Initiative Center based at the University of San Diego. And I'm going to walk through the components of the green building ordinance that Crystal mentioned. Next slide. So I'll be quick here because Crystal did cover this, but we kind of wanted to provide some background information on California building energy standards, which are contained in California's Title 24 and specifically Part 6. These standards are updated every 3 years, and the current standards, the 2019 standards, went into effect January 1st, 2020. And over time, including the most recently adopted standards, which I'll speak about at the end of my short presentation, there's been a general trend toward electrification and decarbonization. Crystal mentioned that California law provides for the ability of local governments to adopt local energy ordinances, sometimes called REACH codes. And to be approved by the Energy Commission, these have to be at least as strict as the statewide code and demonstrate that they're cost effective. And as demonstrated by the little graphic on the right, you can think about this as the local energy code or the REACH code kind of sits on top of the state standard. So the state standards still apply. These just give you an extra layer or an extra requirement on top. Next slide. So I'm going to walk through the 4 elements of this ordinance that's before you this evening. The first one is the residential retrofit energy efficiency requirement. And the slides are organized to show you what building types are affected, what triggers the requirement, and what the compliance options are. And so for this first one, the building types affected are existing residential buildings, both single family and low-rise multifamily, which is defined as 3 stories or less. And the requirements of this portion of the ordinance apply to additions and alterations with a permit value of $50,000 or greater. And the compliance and the requirements and the compliance options are determined by the building type and the building vintage. And so as an example here, multifamily buildings built before 1978 would have to comply with an attic insulation requirement. And then in this case, this group of buildings in this vintage would have to choose between duct ceiling or a cool roof. And finally, in this category of building types and vintages, there is a choice between a lighting package or a water heating package. So the second component is the non-residential energy efficiency requirement. And this applies to existing non-residential, high-rise residential, and hotel motel buildings. And projects that are additions greater than 1,000 square feet or that have an alteration permit value greater than $200,000 or greater trigger the requirement. In this case, the building would have to comply with at least one of the 2019 Cal Green Tier 1 prerequisites. They're listed here. And then if a building has steel framing, the building is encouraged to maximize the efficiency. And there are examples in the ordinance of how to do this. The third component is the non-residential solar photovoltaic requirement. Non-residential high-rise non-residential high-rise residential hotel motel buildings, basically non-residential buildings, both new and existing, would be subject to these requirements. And depending on what building type, you have a different trigger. So in the case of new buildings, all new buildings would be required to comply with these requirements. And on the existing building side, additions that increase the total roof area by at least 1,000 square feet, or alterations with a permit value of at least $1 million in value and affect at least 75% of floor area would trigger this requirement. And compliance is, in other words, the amount of photovoltaics that would be required can be determined 2 different ways with 2 different compliance options. As Crystal mentioned, there was a robust stakeholder feedback process during the development of this ordinance. And so there were exceptions developed along the way, in part due to some of the feedback we received. And so for this particular component, the city of Encinitas could waive or reduce requirements if there are practical challenges that make installing photovoltaics not feasible. An example of this would be shading or limited roof space. Also, if an existing project already had on-site renewable energy, those requirements could be waived. Projects can comply. There are kind of alternative compliance exceptions here. So if a project purchases the highest renewable electricity content available from their electricity provider, that would count towards compliance. And there's a voluntary option to install a ground-mounted system. Also, one of the triggers was evaluation of an alteration permit. And in that case, the value of aesthetic exterior alterations is excluded from that valuation. And then finally, we've received feedback during the process about greenhouses. We understand the impact of that industry in your city. And so greenhouse structures used for commercial, educational, or conservation purposes are exempt. Okay, the final component is the new residential and non-residential electrification requirement. So in this case, all new construction would be subject to this requirement, including non-residential and residential, all building types. So compliance would be to build an all-electric building, and that is defined in the ordinance as a building with no natural gas or propane plumbing, no gas meter connection, and electricity is used for space and water heating, cooking, and clothes drying. Now, there are exceptions to this as well. So if your project is an ADU, an essential facility, or would require significant utility upgrades, you would not have to comply with the all-electric building requirement, but you would still have to comply with the building energy code, and the project would have to be electric ready. And that electric ready means that the wiring and equipment is installed to make natural gas appliances electric in the future. And then finally, there is a limited appliance exception. So there are certain appliances, including in the residential sector, natural gas cooking, in the commercial cooking industry, certain gas stoves, and those projects would have to also comply with the building code and install electric ready. In this case, it's kind of a mixed fuel approach. So there are some appliances using natural gas and some appliances using all electric. Now, we wanted to talk a little bit more about these exceptions. And so I want to just talk briefly about the kind of the primary justification and then the greenhouse gas implications of these exceptions. And so I mentioned the first exception is for residential cooking appliances, pool and spa water heaters, and outdoor fireplaces. We did receive feedback during the stakeholder process about consumer preferences in this area, and these appliances consume a relatively small percentage of the overall gas consumption. And one of the pieces of feedback we got from the Environmental Commission was trying to have a better understanding of the greenhouse gas implications of these exceptions. In other words, what are the foregone greenhouse gas reductions that we would otherwise see if these exceptions weren't in place? And so in the case of this first exception, it's about 45 metric tons in the year 2030. And then on the second exception, these are essential facilities, think hospitals or other kinds of emergency facilities. And there are instances where gas may be required to keep these systems operating. Again, we think this is a limited application, and we did not have enough information on this one to estimate the greenhouse gases. On the accessory dwelling units, the primary justification for why this exception is included is to facilitate construction of ADUs for housing needs, and the greenhouse gas implications or the foregone greenhouse gas reductions is about 650 metric tons. For the restaurant cooking equipment, there is an exception for gas in certain business-related instances where flame cooking is required. But in those cases, emissions must be mitigated with more efficiency elsewhere in the project. So in essence, those emissions are being kind of made up. And this is a limited exception, and the greenhouse gas implications for that are about 20 metric tons. On the high-rise residential central water heater exception that Crystal mentioned earlier as well, we heard stakeholder feedback from developers of high-rise residential projects that some of the alternatives to centralized water heaters are in fact impractical. Again, this is relatively limited application. And when we went to estimate the foregone GHG emissions, we realized that there may be no projects that actually fit into this. So we estimated that the impacts would be zero. And then the final exception for local utility infrastructure design requirements, in the case which again we believe would be relatively limited, where a building project would require significant upgrades to the utility infrastructure to handle the increased electric load, we believe that there's a need for that exception as well. Again, no ability to estimate the greenhouse gases on that exception. Okay, finally, we wanted to provide you just with one slide with some information about the most recent California Energy Code that was just recently adopted. So the California Energy Commission adopted the code on August 11th. It goes into effect January 1st, 2023. And just a couple of highlights of the new code is that solar photovoltaics and battery storage will be required for new residential and high-rise residential construction. Electric heat pump water heaters are the standard now for new single-family residential construction projects. And mixed fuel construction must be electric ready. The one takeaway for this is that the proposed green building ordinance that you're hearing tonight meets or exceeds the requirements of this new 2022 energy code. That concludes my presentation. I just want to acknowledge that our staff, Joe Cates, contributed to this. He's not here today, and Mark Steele is on the line to help answer questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Scott. And that concludes the presentation. I'll just leave the subject and recommended actions up here, and back to you, Mayor Blakespear.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, let me just ask my colleagues if they have questions. Let's not go into comments until after we open the public hearing, hear the public comments. But if you have questions on this presentation, we'll take those now, and then we'll go to the public. So, Councilmember Mosca.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will reserve my comments to after the public comment. I'll also be brief with my questions, knowing that we probably have an hour of public comment. But I did want to say thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Scott, and others that put this, put all the paperwork together in the ordinance. I'm very excited to be talking about this, and to, every time we basically have our climate, one more item of our climate action plan that we can work on, I'm very excited. Just a few questions, because the exceptions are of some concern to me. So I'm glad that Scott ended on the 2022 change in the CEC, California Energy Commission's report on this topic. Did they talk about cost effectiveness at all within their new information that they're releasing?
Yeah, the California Energy Commission always does a cost effectiveness analysis on all of its code changes. That's part of their code update process, that triennial code update process. So there's always a cost effectiveness analysis done on all code changes at the state level.
So when we talk about the fact that we our cost effectiveness studies for justifying what we're doing here tonight is based on other statewide reports, and also piggybacking off what Carlsbad has done. Is there information that we can analysis that we can piggyback off of the state's analysis that actually expands what we can do here in terms of some of these exceptions?
It's possible. We have not reviewed in detail the cost effectiveness studies related to the statewide changes. But as pointed out in the presentation, the current green building ordinance actually meets or exceeds the requirements in 2022 already.
All right. Why didn't we do our own study, cost effectiveness study? Why didn't we look at this ourselves?
We relied mostly on existing cost effectiveness studies.
But we could do analysis ourselves. If say for instance, I could sit here and hypothesize why ADUs, it's completely cost effective to go electrification with ADUs, and it makes no sense to run a gas line. Would we do cost effectiveness study to show and prove that out? You must demonstrate that the
the local requirement is cost effective. Mark, I don't know if you have any insight on the ADU question.
Sure. So the reason why we relied on the statewide cost effectiveness study is just because that's really what's been supporting a lot of similar ordinances that have been going through to the California Energy Commission that are similar to what the city of Encinitas is adopting. And so there was kind of an effort to align Encinitas efforts with what those jurisdictions were doing. It is possible to conduct a separate cost effectiveness study for the city of Encinitas, and that would be similar to what the city of Carlsbad had done for one of their energy ordinances, because they were doing something that was not being adopted across the state. They were looking at electrifying just water heaters within their residential buildings. And so that kind of requirement itself was not analyzed within the statewide study.
I suppose with respect to exception 3 ADUs, that if we looked at the data that we have, that we may find that actually that many folks don't opt to actually run a gas line from maybe the somewhere buried in the foundation of their house or in the front to all the way to the back to an ADU. That most of them, because of the cost, probably just go with electric and do not run a gas line. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
I don't know that I can comment on the frequency of what happens at the ADU project. I don't think we can comment on that.
All right. Do we have any data, Crystal, in terms of how many ADUs actually would actually run a gas line from their primary structure to the ADU? It seems costly.
I would have to look into that exact data, but what I can add is that, and Mark, if you could verify this, the ADUs to build them all electric is cost effective. The reason why we included that exception was because of the housing need justification. So if there were an interest in including or removing that from the ordinance, we would be able to demonstrate through the existing cost effectiveness analysis that constructing an ADU all electric would be cost effective. And Mark, can you verify that?
That's correct. So there is a statewide cost effectiveness study currently out that supports electrification of detached accessory dwelling units. And I think it's important to distinguish between attached and detached, and that attached accessory dwelling units are considered additions when they're being built on a new property under the state code. And so those would be kind of treated separately than a detached ADU. But the cost effectiveness study does support a cost-effective option or path forward for electrification of detached ADUs.
That's a fair comment, because we're talking about new construction. Just real fast on exception 2, we talk about essential facilities, and I looked up the definition of essential facilities under the California code, and it sounded almost like public buildings, like, we're building a fire department, we're building a library. And gosh, I wouldn't want to send a statement out there that we're asking other folks to do things that we're not willing ourselves to do. Our consultant did raise the point that it could be a hospital. And so I wonder if we could define that better, because I don't want any public facilities that we would, construct. I'm not aware of one that we're going to construct, or refurbish. But I wouldn't want people to think that these are our public facilities, that we're not willing to do exactly what we're asking other people to do. And so maybe that exception 2 needs to be just kind of narrowly defined, and especially since our consultant said it's of limited application. If it's of limited application, why put it there? I mean, that's my perspective. Why put it there? The same thing with exception 6. I mean, we talk about, the cost, significant cost in front of the meter. It just seems like it's such a large catch-all. Like, so who determines that it's a significant cost? There's going to be a cost in terms of in front of the meter. But the fact is the technology is there and the innovation's there, and the overall price and value of the unit is going to be where that's made up in terms of the extra cost potentially in front of the meter. And so I think the same thing with exception 6, though we're told that it's a limited application, it just seems kind of open, very open. And I would prefer either you eliminate the exception altogether or you narrowly define it, just like exception 2. I was going to suggest that we eliminate it, but I did hear something about hospitals and other facilities. So if there are facilities like that, I would want to maybe narrow that a bit more. So those are really my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, well, that seemed like a lot of comments too. So I think we should try to get to the public, but I do know that there are 2 other colleagues who want to speak right now. So Councilmember Krantz.
Thank you. Can you go back to that slide where you have the exceptions on a table and you talk about that one right there? Can you explain to me, I didn't quite understand the issue of dual fuel requirements. So where is that? It was in one of these slides here where you had to have it wired for electric, but you could have gas.
I think you might have been referring to this slide where we mention it in this blue portion, the light blue portion, and that is standard across all of these exceptions, is that if one of these exceptions is utilized, the building would still need to be built electric ready, meaning, for example, if you elected to take advantage of the cooking exception, you'd still have to have an electrical outlet at where your stove would be, so that in the future, if a future owner wanted to install an induction cooktop, then they could easily do so.
So do you have it defined to actually pulling the wires, or is it a conduit? Do we get that level of detail?
I believe so, and perhaps Scott or Bart could clarify, but I think it does get down to the very specific level of defining the electrical components that will be required to make it be considered electric ready. And it's all the way down to, it's everything, including the panel, the wires, and the outlet. So it's simply just plugging something in.
Great. I think Councilmember Mosca's onto something in that particular category, because the foregone GHGs are, to me, significant enough that we would want to look at this and see how we could incentivize people who are building ADUs to just, use the single fuel instead of dual fuels. But I know that there are some electrical implications. If a house has only service of 100 amps or whatever, and they're tapped out, they already have their house wired and use all that, presents some challenges. So I get that, I'm interested in knowing how we can make that exception a little smarter and require people to actually prove that either they don't have the juice and they'd have to pull new wires from the service and higher SDG&E, et cetera, et cetera. But that was the one thing that I was looking for a little clarification on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
Thanks. So I have 2 questions, hopefully quick ones. And one question is pertaining to the applicability of these standards and how far back they will apply. So if we have projects that are in the queue right now and they're either in the phase of submitting their application or they have an application that's deemed complete, I see that there's a separate application for these standards. Are they going to have to revise their project, go back and make these changes?
So these requirements would be applicable at the building phase. So if they haven't submitted their request for a building permit yet, then that project would be subject to these requirements. So that's the trigger. So they could be in their planning phase and be coordinating their planning level permits, but it's at the building phase that these get triggered. So I've actually been participating in the staff advisory committee meetings that we hold for the public on project proponents that come in and ask questions to staff, and sharing with them that these requirements may be on the horizon, and to be aware of that and be ready if their building permits for their project aren't submitted for a few months from now.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question is about the exception for restaurants. So am I getting this right that we would have a commercial application and they would be required to build all electrical? But then if they have a tenant who wants a pizza oven or wants to have a wok or have something with open flame cooking, then they have to apply for a separate exception. So their building's all electric, but then they might have this opportunity to install and hook up to natural gas. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, let's go to the public comments and then we'll come back to council deliberation. So I'll open the public hearing.
Right, okay, just a reminder to all of our speakers, when I call your name, please unmute your microphone and you will have 3 minutes. Our first speaker is Harold Standiford. Harold, you can start when ready.
Thank you. Mayor Blakespear, Deputy Mayor Kranz, and council members. I'm Harold Standiford, and I will speak to you tonight as a representative of the My Generation group of the San Diego Sierra Club. I am also a resident of Encinitas. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council on this item, the Green Building Ordinance. There is much to like in this proposed change to the Encinitas Building Code. For that, I thank you and the staff who have worked tirelessly on this item. As you all know, we are in a climate emergency, a crisis that is brought home to us in an up-close and personal way daily. Also, addiction to the extraction, transportation, refinement, and combustion of fossil fuels if we planet are to survive. And we must take immediate action. Each day is valuable. The proposal that you are considering tonight is a strong statement and a bold step in the right direction. The climate emergency demands that bold actions be taken to stop the worst effects of the climate crisis from causing more damage to the people and places we love. By moving to all-electric new construction, the city will begin to address a major source of pollution, the methane gas. The proposed ordinance does require use of electricity in single-family homes and multifamily projects. However, it does permit, as you've just heard, exceptions in certain cases, including ADUs, gas stovetops, pool and spa heating, outdoor fireplaces and barbecues, etc. In these circumstances, it'll be necessary to plumb gas to the project, leading not only to the burning of fossil fuel, but leakage of methane gas and introduction of pollutants into the home. We urge the council to limit exceptions to further reduce introduction of gas burning appliances and release of more greenhouse gases. The My Generation group applauds the council for considering this ordinance and call for its approval with the changes suggested to further strengthen it. The council should amend the staff recommendation and limit the number of exemptions that fossil fuel corporations can have to manipulate and continue to build new methane gas infrastructure in our homes and neighborhoods. Let's build new neighborhoods that are clean, safe, and free of pollutants. Let's make our new homes gas-free and cleaner. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ann Feeney. Ann, you can start when ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Ann Feeney, and I'm a volunteer with the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition and also San Diego 350. I want to applaud the Encinitas City Council for being a leader in bringing forth this comprehensive green building ordinance. Eliminating the use of methane gas for space and water heating in all new buildings is highly commendable and will significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions from new construction. However, I hope the council will eliminate the exceptions which allow the use of methane gas, such as for cooking, for ADUs, for multifamily high-rise apartments. And I sent in a letter to the council that you should have in your packets. A week ago, the UN released a report from the IPCC, the International Panel of Climate Change, which the Secretary General of the UN called a code red for humanity. This report stated in no uncertain terms that we all must stop using fossil fuels as soon as possible. We're doomed to the Earth continuing to warm for the next 30 years with ever more frequent wildfires, droughts, heat waves, sea level rise, and we'll reach the magic 1.5 degrees centigrade around 2050 at a minimum. But if we don't act right now, we'll go far beyond that critical tipping point and much earlier than 2050. Code red for humanity. So back to Encinitas. I hope the residents of Encinitas realize that this proposed ordinance will not take away anybody's beloved gas stove. This ordinance is for new construction only. It's cheaper to build all electric homes. So both residents who are building new homes and developers who are building ADUs, low-income housing, and multifamily residences should appreciate this savings. It's cheaper to operate on an all-electric home due to the high efficiency of these electric alternatives. So renters and homeowners alike will save on their monthly bills. Finally, if any home cooks try induction cooktops, as I have, they will love them even more than gas stoves. Many high-end homes are installing induction cooktops. Due to their safety and performance, induction cooktops are recognized by chefs and home designers as trend-setting technology. Most importantly, induction cooktops do not produce any indoor air pollution, which the gas stoves do. Thus, I urge the council members to think carefully about the proposed exceptions. We're in a real climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kelly Linden. Kelly, you can start when ready. And Kieran, if you can have those pages ready.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So yes, my name is Kelly Linden, and I do commend the city of Encinitas, both the elected officials, the staff, and the consultants for their leadership on this ordinance, particularly with regards to the building electrification for new construction. As you know, over the next few decades, everyone will be transitioning off of fossil fuels, both for the health of individuals as well as for the earth. For buildings, that means moving the electric grid to use clean, renewable resources, as Encinitas is already doing, and transitioning off of natural gas. You know, natural gas is really just a clever marketing term. It's methane. This is a very dangerous and unhealthy greenhouse gas. So this ordinance lays the groundwork for this transition. You're really thinking about the future generations by starting right now with new buildings and from day one avoiding natural gas in the first place. This is going to save money up front by avoiding having to provide two different fuels, and it'll avoid the cost later to switch over to all electric. But I am concerned, as others are, about the exceptions that are allowed in this ordinance, and that these are just delaying the inevitable. And specifically, I'd like you to take a look at exceptions 1, 3, and 5 for residential. All of these, as was mentioned already, have been demonstrated to be cost effective in their all electric solutions. So with regards to the table that's on the screen, this is from the packet that was put out for today regarding the exceptions. And this drills into, this particular picture drills into exception number 1. And it estimates how many units over the next 10 years will take advantage of this exception. And in particular, if you see the column that says number of units with exception, you can see how many of these will occur. And so one comment is there's not very many pools and spas that we're talking about. There's demonstrated cost-effective solutions. Are we really going to put this exception in so that one person can have a pool heater? It's something to think about. The other thing worth noticing is that it's really primarily multifamily units that we're talking about for the cooking appliance exception. And, you know, is this really where we want to have all of this indoor gas pollution from stoves in these smaller multifamily units? I'm not sure that really makes sense. If you could move it forward to table 3, which I think is on the next page. This, keep going. Keep going. We want exception 3. There we go. Table 3. So this is related to exception 3. This is the estimate of the number of ADUs, and indeed it distinguishes between attached and detached and how many units would be built. What's really interesting is this is a very large portion of the new construction that will be happening. And so it really is important to be thoughtful about how many of these to accept, especially if they're going to be all electric anyway. sort of puzzling to me that there's a rationale that this will facilitate construction of ADUs. They're going to have to be all electric anyway, so I'm kind of confused why this would need to be an exception. The last one that I want to comment on is an exception 5. If you could scroll down to that, it's just text. There is no table.
Kelly, your 3 minutes are up.
Okay, I'll just finish my sentence, which is it estimates that there's 0 multifamily units that will be built for exception 5. So I'm unclear why we would include it when there's 0 units expected. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Our next speaker is Scott Shell. Scott, you can start when ready.
Good evening. I'm Scott Shell, a principal with EHCD Architects. We're an 80-person firm and we practice all over the state. I just want to thank you all and staff for all your work on this. It's great to see this proposal and the leadership, and I suspect you will end up being a model for surrounding cities. So I think it's worth getting this right, and you're well on your way to that. Our firm has had a really positive experience with electrification. We've done a lot. We did our first one over 20 years ago, and we found it to be a very reliable and robust and cost-effective solution. A lot of our clients are now actually asking for this, even though they may not know what to call it. They're asking for buildings that are low carbon, and they're asking for buildings that are healthy and don't have the indoor air pollutants. And so we naturally steer them in this direction. Our biggest client is University of California. I've just finished a project at UC San Diego, and they've had a policy for 2 years to do all electric buildings. They do have an exception policy, and I called up the staff that are managing that a couple months ago, and they said nobody has asked for an exception in the last 2 years. And University of California is a big organization. You know, they've got 10 campuses, they've got major medical centers, they've got housing, they've got offices, they've got classrooms, they've got everything, right? And their design teams all over the state, all different architects and engineers, just are not seeing the need to ask for exceptions for their projects. I think sometimes the exceptions, you know, you think you're doing people a favor, but as an architect, I think about the timeline. So you're passing this ordinance and it's going to go into effect and be in effect for several years, but that's the date of the permit. And then it might take, you know, a couple of years to build that project. And so then it's the late 2020s and you've got a building, brand new building with gas in it. And then that client or that condo board or that owner is going to have to retrofit that building in the not too distant future to meet California's climate goals. So I think that the key is just to build it right to start with and not saddle anybody with these outdated fossil fuel buildings. So thank you a lot. I really appreciate your efforts. And again, I encourage you to support this and to try and tighten up the exceptions if you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rich Williams. Let's see if he's on here. I do not see Rich registered, so we'll go to Max Lebovitz. Max?
Hi. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Max Lebovitz, and I live in Leucadia. First, I want to thank everyone involved in developing and pushing this ordinance. I also want to recognize Kelly Linden and Robert Carr. They gave an extremely informative presentation on building electrification at our July meeting for San Diego 350, a local climate action organization that I volunteer for. They have been doing an amazing job educating the community on the implications of the green building ordinance. My wife and I are expecting our first child in late October, and will then be looking to buy a place locally, ideally a property with an ADU or room to build one. ADUs are in high demand with my generation and are becoming a requirement for millennials who want to own real estate in this area. Home prices are now so high that many of us need to subsidize our mortgages by renting out. That said, we hope that you will consider removing exception 3 from the ordinance, as we don't feel ADUs should be excluded and that they should be built all electric. A huge consideration for us in our home search is finding an eco-friendly property. Gas-powered appliances, including stoves, heat and AC units, and water heaters, are expensive, bad for the environment, and bad for our health. I certainly don't want our newborn baby breathing in harmful gases. Green household appliance technology has improved drastically. In fact, induction cooktops heat way more efficiently than gas stovetops. Needless to say, we also encourage the removal of exception 1 and encourage the inclusion of stoves in the electrification mandate. We already own an electric vehicle and plan to one day live on solar-powered energy in a completely sustainable property. We're proud to live in a progressive city that values the environment, and we're in support of the ordinance and the construction of all electric buildings, which will stop the continued expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in Encinitas. That's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Marie Chen. Marie, let's see, she was on here. I don't see her present, so we will move to Christine Schindler.
Hello, this is Christine Schindler. I'm East Encinitas resident. I just wanted to say right on, this is awesome to hear this ordinance coming forward. I appreciate Kristen Ojira and other staff work on this. And it's always good to see EPIC involved. So wonderful to see that Scott Anders and his team are still pushing our San Diego region forward when it comes to climate action and energy efficiency and more. So I just want to applaud you. It's never perfect the first time. You're out in front. We all need to get used to these kinds of changes needing to happen so that we truly can take some action and move away from fossil fuels. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Matthew Vasilakis.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. This is Matthew Vasilakis from Climate Action Campaign, dialing in to support tonight's green building ordinance and asking the Council to remove unnecessary fossil fuel exemptions that are in the current proposal. As you are all aware, methane gas is not only a highly potent greenhouse gas, but is also a dangerous indoor air pollutant harming public health. Mixed energy use approaches will also create more stranded fossil fuel assets, which will create a burden for future generations of ratepayers and taxpayers when the inevitable methane gas rollback occurs. Additionally, expanding fossil fuel infrastructure amidst the climate emergency, as the various exemptions would allow, sends the wrong message to the public that we can have our cake and eat it too. We can expand and burn fossil fuels and be sustainable. We believe that is untrue, and we urge the Council to strike the exemptions 1, 3, and 5 for various appliances, ADUs, and quote, high-rise construction, all things that can be efficiently and cost-effectively built all electric. Encinitas has another unique opportunity to lead its peers in San Diego and Southern California on all electric reach codes and building electrification. We have faith Encinitas will once again be a leader and set the tone for the region and stop the expansion of dangerous fossil fuel infrastructure. We thank city staff, Crystal as always, EPIC for their hard work on this important initiative, and the city leadership for moving this critical work forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bruce Becker.
Good evening, Mayor Blakespear and council members. It's a pleasure to talk to you. My name is Bruce Becker. I'm a longtime North County resident and also an OBGYN. In my years working on labor and delivery, a typical patient that we would see at 6 or 7 months would come in with abdominal pains, and we'd find her to be in premature labor. If she came in early enough, typically we were able to treat these contractions and send this patient home, hoping to get her to term with her pregnancy. New research just in the last couple of years strongly suggests that if returning to home means an exposure to an elevated level of air pollution, this patient is much more likely to return in labor and actually deliver a preemie. And you probably know that they carry an increased risk of dying in the first year of life, of having significant childhood illnesses, and even illnesses into adulthood. It's really a lousy way to start life. There's an additional study that came out of UCLA last year that really underlines the health risks of indoor air pollution, especially from gas stoves and heaters. And we do now have viable alternatives. I think the previously mentioned stakeholder preference is really just a lack of education. Like Ann Feeney, I've been cooking with induction for the last year and a half. I call it my Tesla in the kitchen. It's way better than gas. So I'm here tonight as a physician and a North County resident to congratulate you on taking on this ordinance, but to ask you to really look to modify or eliminate some of these exemptions. Leadership literally means getting out ahead, and you all have an opportunity to demonstrate for the region that you're serious about protecting moms and babies, kids with asthma, adults with cardiorespiratory disease, and really addressing the climate crisis with the urgency that we need. Now, the science really tells us we don't have time anymore for half measures. So I'm really asking that you take a strong position with this ordinance and not just create something that's maybe politically palatable for everybody. This is very important, and we're counting on you and really hoping that you will set the standard for the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Karina Gonzalez.
Good evening, Mayor Blakespear and council members. My name is Karina Gonzalez and I am with Hammond Climate Solutions. I want to start off by thanking staff for the proposed ordinance. However, it does not go far enough to protect us from methane gas. Natural gas is nothing more than greenwashing marketing tactic fossil fuel corporations are using in order to continue to expand their infrastructure and profits. I urge the council to amend staff recommendations to remove the fossil fuel exemptions. Tonight, you have a chance to be a leader as cities across the region begin to electrify buildings and stop the expansion of dirty and harmful fossil fuels. As we very clearly saw in the IPCC report released last week, there is no time for modest actions to stop the worst effects of climate change. We need to act now, and we need to act boldly. I look forward to seeing the city become the first in the region to adopt an all-electric ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lena Cortez.
Hello, City Council members. My name is Leanna Cortez, and I'm a youth board member at Clean for Kids, as well as a concerned youth and student at UCSD. At Clean for Kids, we hope that the Encinitas City Council will follow the lead of 47 other cities across California that have adopted stringent all-electric ordinances and limit the number of exemptions to keep our families and climate safe. While the city's proposed ordinance is commendable and should be approved, it does not go far enough to keep methane gas from reaching our children's lungs and the atmosphere. And the Encinitas City Council must amend the staff recommendation to limit the number of exceptions that fossil fuel corporations can manipulate to continue building new methane gas infrastructure in our neighborhoods. For example, exemption 1 that talks about the all residential buildings containing non-electric cooking appliances and so forth. As I've mentioned in the past, when I've spoken before, gas stoves increase the incidence of respiratory diseases, asthma, cardiovascular diseases, and so much more. And modern electric induction stoves work great in the home and in apartment kitchens and are safer and cooler. My father is personally an executive chef at restaurants and can also commend that electric induction stoves work just as well as gas. And pool spas and outdoor fireplaces, they all have electric solutions. And these luxury items should not be the reason to expand dangerous fossil fuel infrastructures. We also talk about exception 3, as Councilmember Joe Mosca agreed with. ADUs going electric is completely doable. In fact, adding gas is actually a cost, not a savings. And as well as ADUs have smaller internal space, which increases the health risk of gas cooktops. And they are also highly desirable for young people if desirability is something that is going to be included. And another argument against exception 5, as we do not want any exceptions on this ordinance. Multi-family high-rises are actually great candidates for electrification. The technology to electrify these type of buildings is mature, it's readily available, and cost-effective. So we hope that you will go forward with the ordinance with no exceptions. It's a bold ask, but it's an ask that is for the future of not only many kids and mothers and families, but also for youth that may be purchasing these homes later on in our life. And we want to protect, environmental rights and environmental justice, and increasing methane within these homes, such a potent indoor pollutant, is just not acceptable. So we do hope that you go forward with this ordinance with no exceptions. And I thank you for your time and for all the speakers tonight. You guys are doing an amazing job. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dadla Panizil. Dadla, you can start when ready.
Hi, this is Dadla. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Thanks, Kathy. I want to thank the council for moving our city toward clean energy. This is fabulous. And I want to specifically thank Crystal Nahara for putting together a climate action implementation plan, for gathering community support and input from the stakeholder committee, which I got to be on. I want to remind everyone that community choice energy is coming. Our commercial and municipal energy users today are receiving clean energy through San Diego's Community Power Plan, and Encinitas is part of that. Residential customers like me will be getting that, and all of you will be getting that starting early next year. So it's important to switch as much of our energy load to electric power as possible, and this ordinance does that. Please consider carefully any exemptions, especially the ADU natural gas carve-out, which makes 0 sense to me, and I don't remember that coming up in the committee. That makes no sense. Now, how to implement what we already have. We have a solid building ordinance set now, and with these new ones, we'll have the most clean energy advanced programs in the nation. What we lack, I think, is their implementation. So what I would like to ask, and we've talked to the Environmental Commission about this, a subcommittee with council membership to look at existing ordinances and the level of compliance. Let's try to make our ordinances reality. One little note, HVAC changeouts, only about 10% are pulled for permits. There's a lot of non-permitted changeouts, water heaters, and we need to figure out why and make those permits a quality assurance piece of paper rather than a burden. So I would like to look at that as a project through a subcommittee. And also finally, homeowner education. So the homeowners pull this rather than being forced into it. And Palo Alto has a wonderful program called the Green Genie program, where a home comfort expert is available to help someone who is considering re-roofing, a change out, water heater, small to large, an addition, adding to their home. There's great opportunities to improve the envelope and reduce the load so we don't need as much electricity in the first place. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tara Hammond.
Good evening, Mayor Blakespear and council members. My name is Tara Hammond, founder of Hammond Climate Solutions. I'm asking you tonight to please make Encinitas the countywide leader by taking steps to achieve zero carbon by adopting robust all-electric building ordinances that stop the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. For over a decade, I have watched SDG&E and Sempra continue to erode climate action in our county, and building electrification is a topic they're spending a lot of time lobbying against. Sempra, which created a lobbying arm to oppose community choice energy just a handful of years ago, also has ties to a front group pushing natural gas. You may have seen the August 12th LA Times Boiling Point story titled, "This San Diego Energy Company is Doubling Down on Fossil Fuels." That is, of course, about Sempra. Its investors see the writing on the wall. Don't be fooled by their greenwashing campaigns. Adding any natural gas in 2021 and beyond is frankly incredibly dangerous and irresponsible. This is why I'm spending my time and money turning my home all electric. I respectfully ask that the Encinitas City Council amends the staff recommendation to remove fossil fuel exemptions, prioritizing a just and livable future over fossil fuel profits. Thank you so much for your time and leadership. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Angie Neeson.
Hi, thank you again for taking the time to go over this important topic. My name is Dr. Angie Neeson. I'm a family and culinary medicine physician. Many of my patients and families I treat live in San Diego, especially in Encinitas. I spoke up the last time when the city unanimously recognized the need to address climate action emergently. And while this was commendable, extremely commendable, we really should not have exceptions. And let me tell you 3 reasons why. So number one, by allowing these exceptions to dangerous and unhealthy fossil fuel infrastructure, you're not only keeping the message of more confusion, but the public message and opportunity you have to make this a climate emergency gets confused and it becomes a very gray area. So if you're in a climate emergency, and we saw the IPCC report say we're in code red, when you see a fire up ahead, do you tell the public, well, actually, it's not that big of a problem. We really don't mean it. What we said about climate emergency doesn't really matter. What you do is you just cause lots of confusion. And this is something I continually deal with in my primary care office. This problem with confusion and misinformation is something that we currently in healthcare are currently battling with COVID-19. But I'll leave that for another talk. Bottom line is, following the science is telling us pretty clear we are in a state of emergency. So let's just treat it as such. Number two, like I said, I'm a culinary medicine physician. So not only do I teach about how to eat, what dietary patterns, but also how to cook. And we know that the nutritional science is increasingly clear that the way food is cooked, particularly meat on high heat grills, is not good for your health. Not only just the respiratory aspect of it, but it also produces advanced end glycation end products that increase the carcinogenic properties of the food and the inflammatory properties in the body. So by removing these exceptions, you're also impacting human health. And this is an opportunity to be able to teach the public about how to cook. So use this as an opportunity. And then lastly, your lead on this is so commendable. This will go down as one of the most impactful policies you've made on the following generations. Your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren will talk about this. But we know what happens when politics doesn't follow the science. People die. Let your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren be reminded that you are on the right side of science for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Donna Westbrook. I do not see Donna on the line. So we'll move to Carl Aldinger.
Good evening. My name is Carl Aldinger, and I am the conservation organizer for Sierra Club San Diego. We support the REACH Code ordinance creating all-electric new construction and the other climate action plan measures, including solar for commercial buildings and building efficiency enhancements. The city and the entire planet is in a climate emergency, and through the hard work of Jim Wong, the Environmental Commission, the Sustainability Manager, Nahira, staff at EPIC, and now the council, we're on the brink of bringing great change to Encinitas. In all likelihood, through your example, the greater Southern California region will be influenced by tonight's actions. We're also future-proofing homes and businesses from the tougher and more expensive task of eventually decarbonizing a building that is run on gas combustion. Coupled with the default selection of Power 100 renewable energy from the San Diego Community Power and powered directly with rooftop solar PV during daylight hours, these new buildings will represent the future, but they're being built today. This would be even more true if the ordinance were not to have exceptions for accessory dwelling units, exceptions for gas cooktops in the kitchen, and exceptions for gas appliances outside the home, including fire pits, barbecues, spa, and pool heaters. ADUs are more straightforward to build without gas, and the cost efficacy data that you have all been provided proves, even here in Encinitas, in building climate zone 7, with our electricity rates, that the math is on the side of electric, not gas. You can be assured of this because the CEC requires that to be true, or this city ordinance will not be allowed to amend the state building code. Please consider striking those exceptions from the ordinance, and thank you very much for drafting and advancing this regionally important ordinance tonight.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tom Abram.
Hi, my name is Tom Abram, and I'm a volunteer with the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition. First, I do want to thank the City of Encinitas, the staff, for taking the steps to have the first major electrification ordinance in the county. We'll be joining about, I think it's now 50 other jurisdictions in the state that have taken similar steps. Others have already covered concerns with the individual exceptions. I do echo those concerns. However, I do want to discuss the difference between partial electrification and full electrification. There are some, specific trigger points that we will not hit if we only look at partial electrification. The staff report notes that fugitive emissions from methane is not considered in the analysis. The foregone greenhouse gas reductions for individual measures only include combustion. I understand that might be a requirement from a regulatory standpoint or from a policy standpoint, but those emissions are real. The worst case estimates of methane leaks show that they are nearly equivalent to the combustion emissions over a 20-year period, which what we really have to be focusing on. Any extension of natural gas infrastructure will increase these fugitive emissions from methane. Fully electrified buildings will also be less expensive to build than most electrified buildings. Imagine a building that runs a gas line for a stove, just for a stove versus one that's fully electric. In order to achieve the state's carbon neutrality goal of 2045, which is now being looked at to bring closer and in line with what we need to do, and we will need a massive decarbonization effort in existing buildings. We have a lot to work already to do. Any expansion of natural gas infrastructure will require more effort to electrify in the future. I've been grateful to have the resources and the knowledge to be able to fully electrify my own home, reducing my emissions and reducing the negative health impacts on my children, but certainly easier to have done it right from the start. I urge you to reconsider these exceptions and become the gold standard for decarbonization in San Diego County. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Scott Malloy. Scott, you can start when ready.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Scott Malloy, and I work in the development industry. I've spent my entire career working in real estate development and construction. And I want to let you know, first off, right out the gate, I have a home that is wired to be all electric. The only gas appliance that I have in my home is my stove. And when I remodel my kitchen, I will install an induction cooktop and an electric oven. So fundamentally, I support this idea of moving towards all electric homes. But I think there needs to be some sort of reality check on some of this. First of all, my water heater is a tankless electric hot water heater. My energy bill went up about $20 a month. So that's the first impact that I noticed. And that will be the same impact for basically anyone that converts gas appliances to electric. Your energy bill will go up, notwithstanding installing solar on your roof. There is not enough roof area for most new construction, especially multifamily, to support all electric usage. They will not be able to offset 100% of their electric energy demand with solar. So now you're going to get power off of the grid based on the new, essentially doubling of the energy demand. 47% of the power in the state is generated by natural gas fired power plants. 47% of our power. Those plants are about 35% efficient on average. That means to basically double the electric energy demand of a new home, you're actually going to increase the natural gas consumption incrementally for that home by about 34%. So in today's situation, absent having 100% renewable grid, and at least getting to a point where you're about 35% natural gas powered power plants, you're going to see an increase in natural gas consumption. So has the city analyzed that impact as associated with these regulations? So the last point I'll make is that the California Energy Commission is currently in their current code cycle evaluating these regulations and will be incorporating new standards in the next code cycle. So the city is going to have to adopt, if they want to maintain their own standards that differ from the state, they're going to have to, in about a year and a half, adopt all new local amendments again. because you're going to be inconsistent with the state code. So my recommendation would be, and I'm not here saying I'm opposed to what you're trying to do, but what my recommendation would be to follow and participate in the CEC process to implement these types of regulations at the state level. And then when the state adopts its code, adopt your code with local amendments at that point in time, about 1.5 to 2 years from now.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kathy Nicholson.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So good evening, Mayor Blake Spear and City Council members. My name is Kathy Nicholson. I'm an energy engineer and energy consultant with over 30 years of experience in clean energy, energy efficiency, and electrification. I've lived, worked, and raised 2 kids in San Diego County over the past 20 years. For the past 8 years, most of my work as an energy consultant has been designing solar and more recently, battery energy storage systems for homes and business owners in California. I've also been volunteering and doing pro bono and advisory work for several clean energy and climate action groups in the county, including Grid Alternatives, the Electric Vehicle Association of San Diego, the San Diego Green Building Council, and Stay Cool for Grandkids. I would like to voice my support for the position of the San Diego Building Electrification Coalition regarding your proposed all-electric ordinance 2021-13. Their position is, as you know, that the all-electric ordinance should be approved, but exceptions that allow the continued expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure should be removed. The removal of those exceptions makes the most sense for economic, cost-saving, health, safety, air quality, and climate reasons. It's time to cut the apron strings for gas completely, not just partly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And then let's see, I'm just going to go through Rich Williams. Let's see, still not on the line. Marie Chen. I do not see Marie. Donna Westbrook, I do not see Donna. That does conclude speakers on this item.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much to the speakers who called in and to our professional staff, Crystal, and your team who worked on this. I really appreciate all the people who have participated in the stakeholder groups as well. I know, the process was robust and intensive and really important. And I just really want to recognize all that good work that went into it. Do you mind putting the exception slide back up on the screen?
I can do that in just a second.
Okay. And I'll just share that I'm just going to put out a suggestion for us to talk about moving forward. So, this is considered a reach code, and I would like to encourage us to reach a little farther than what is proposed, and to consider eliminating some of these exceptions and then narrowing others of them, because they're at every level all the time. There are the reminders about the fact that we are in the climate emergency. So when you look at a fire that's been burning for more than a month in this state, you look at sea level rise, and just a couple days ago, I was at a press conference with Councilmember Kranz and Congressman Mike Levin, and also Gina McCarthy, who came all the way from DC. She's the White House National Climate Advisor. We were talking about moving the tracks because of in Del Mar, because of the threat of sea level rise. And then, of course, the UN and the Code Red for Humanity, it's just at every level all the time, I think we're talking about the climate crisis. And this is something that the city of Encinitas could do that would help us to address this climate emergency. So I'm really proud of the city for this is the first major electrification ordinance in the county. There are, of course, others in the state, but this is the most ambitious and the most comprehensive of any in the county, and I'm very proud of that. But I think we could do more by going a little farther here. So what I'd like to propose is that we consider eliminating exceptions number 1, 3, and 5. So 1 are the cooking appliances, and this goes to that question of stakeholder preference. And I think a lot of times, there are always these competing values, and and residents' current preference, I think, given the cost realities being equivalent and the fact that the technology is there for us to start to do something to shift resident preference, I feel like we should do that with this exception number 1, especially because a lot of these things, this would be the only reason that new homes would end up with a whole gas piping infrastructure. So saying, making it so that all of these buildings that would be built into the future would still have gas infrastructure seems like really a mistake. It seems to me like, I know there will be a little bit of a pain point at times, but I recognize too that, we received public comment and an email from Scott Shell, who had written to us that he was representing 80 architects and staff and talking about how successful electrifying has been, and that they're ready for it in the building industry, in the architecture and building industry. And he brought up, as you may have mentioned, or you may remember, the UC system, the entire UC system. And one thing I just want to mention from his email that he had sent to us several days ago, which I took note of, was that our state of California tops the American Lung Association's list of the most polluted cities every year, and that our buildings are emitting more pollution than our power plants. And that's because power plants have pollution controls, whereas our buildings don't have that. And so these all-electric buildings reduce indoor and outdoor air pollution. And this is especially important for affordable housing because it reduces construction costs and it provides for healthy indoor air for everyone. It doesn't disadvantage people who are more likely to live in high-density housing, which is lower income people having, more air pollution. I think there's some serious equity concerns there. And I'll note that on number 3, accessory dwelling units, in order to build an accessory unit, a detached unit, you have to obviously put electricity in because people have to turn on the light. But, to run a whole other gas infrastructure to a small little unit because of, personal preference for the stovetop or something, to me, that doesn't seem like the place where we should make that exception. And as was noted by public comments, and you can see here, a lot of our housing will be ADUs. We're building a lot of ADUs in this city, and I think we need to be on the side of making them as healthy as possible. And then the fifth exception 1, 3, and 5, we don't allow high rises anyway in the city. So to have an exception just makes no sense to me. You can't have over 7. This is for 7 stories or taller. And so, I don't think that we're served by having this in any way. And I would suggest that to Councilmember Mosca's questioning and statements at the beginning that tonight we move forward with the elimination of these 3, but we also ask staff to come back in the future with more narrow definitions for these other 3. So for numbers 2, 4, and 6, so that we can make sure that, like he said, that we have skin in the game, that we are following the best practices for all government buildings, including county buildings and fire and any other thing that might be built in our city. So that, that's the essential facilities one. And then number 6 does seem very broad, and I don't even fully understand what it's there for. But to me, it seems like we should really narrow these down so that those exceptions are less. But, moving forward tonight with this ordinance minus those 3, with direction to make these other 3 more narrow, to me, that seems like a good way forward. And I think I'll go ahead and make a motion about that. And of course, I'd be open to modifying the motion, but we also do have 2 other agenda items. So I want to make sure we're able to move through our agenda, which is one of the reasons I'm jumping in here to make a motion.
And Mayor, do you want to close the public hearing?
Yes, and I will close the public hearing. Thank you. Okay, well, I see, so I made a motion and there's no second. So that makes it.
I will second your motion. But there is one thing I'd like to add, but I can wait for the other comments.
Okay, no, it's you. So you can second and make your comments, and then I'll go to your colleagues.
Well, what I was going to say is that I'm a little concerned about projects that have approval that are now going to be on the verge of building and that will have to seek this update. they've got all their plans finalized, and we might have some ADUs in the queue. And we just received an email during this public testimony from a home builder in the city that this exception will be harmful to this project. And so my preference is that we remove this exception, but that buildings that are deemed complete, projects that are deemed complete with their applications can still go forward as planned.
Okay, let me ask staff to respond to that.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to find my unmute button. I'm probably not the best staff person to respond because I don't oversee the planning permit approval effort. My understanding is that there's two phases. There's the planning phase and then there's the building phase. And so this particular ordinance would only affect the building phase. So if they have not submitted for their permits for their building, then, and this goes into place, then it would be triggered. But if they've submitted for planning, then, and they have not submitted for building, then it would need to, they would need to comply to this. One thing to keep in mind is that within the building, you're pretty flexible as to what you can do. In the planning phases, when you physically locate your buildings on the plans and when you identify the land uses and what your building is going to look like from the outside. But the things that are in this ordinance, I would suggest that are pretty flexible, and removing something like a gas line would be, I think, easier than you might expect.
I would ask the city attorney to weigh in. Is there any impact of SB 330 on the application process?
Thank you. This is Leslie Devaney, city attorney, Deputy Mayor Krantz. I'm not sure about the SB 330 ramifications specifically as it relates to this question that you have. I would defer on to staff on that. But what I would say from a legal perspective relative to the question that was posed to Crystal, excuse me, just now, is that from a legal perspective, I would only be concerned that that vested rights should not be eroded. So I'm concerned only if you're going to be trying to have any sort of developers or development or builders somehow have to comply with this ordinance when they are vested, and the vested, I believe, would be more towards the building phase. But I would defer on the specifics of SB 330. I think that I don't see that there'd be a problem from what I recall.
Okay. Does what you just heard, Councilmember Hinsey, affect your feeling at all?
Not particularly, because I do think there's quite a lot of detail that's going into applying for a building permit, and that, there's so much that has to be done to even get to that phase of going forward for the building permit, that I'd be concerned significant revisions would have to be made. So I would like to keep it.
Okay, so I appreciate the comments and the second, and let me hear from our colleagues, and then we'll return to this specific question. So, Councilmember Mosca.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to just take a moment to back up for a second, and just talk about the urgency of the moment and why we're acting and why we're doing what we're doing. I think that needs to just be highlighted once again. Obviously, it doesn't need to be said to this group. As they say, we're singing to the choir, but climate change is the challenge of our time. The speakers have kind of noted the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They just came out with their 6th report. And it's jarring. And I encourage everybody to read the report that came out. I'm going to just read some excerpts from an article that basically talks about the report. Within the next 2 decades, temperatures are likely to rise by more than 1.5 centigrade above pre-industrial levels, breaching the ambitious ambition of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement and bringing widespread devastation and extreme weather. Only rapid and drastic reductions in greenhouse gases in this decade can prevent such climate breakdown, with every fraction of a degree of further heating likely to compound the accelerating effects, according to the IPCC, the world's leading authority on climate science. The UN Secretary General, this report is a code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening, and the evidence is irrefutable. Greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel burning and deforestation are choking our planet and putting billions of people at immediate risk. One more quote that I just wanted to read that I thought, this is not the first, quote unquote, this is not the first generation of world leaders to be warned by scientists about the gravity of the climate crisis, but they're the last that can afford to ignore them. How potent to say that, right? We are the last. We are leaders. We're actually in office right now. We are community leaders. We are leaders at the time when we are being warned that there is no more time to not act. We need to act now. And, you know, over the last decade or so, when we look around the globe, who has been acting? It's cities. Cities around the world have been acting, and they've been inspiring more action. And I would say that California cities have been at the forefront of inspiring action around the globe, and specifically Encinitas. Encinitas acted, you know, when we said, oh, well, California is on the path of 100% renewable energy by 2045. We said that's not good enough. We want more renewable energy now. We want 100% by 2030. That's what we said in our climate action plan. And what did we do? We actually created a community choice energy program, the second largest in the state of California. It is thriving. It is moving the dial on renewable energy. It is creating development of renewable energy in a region that we've never seen before. So what I'm saying here is that our actions not only have consequences for the city of Encinitas, the region certainly, but our actions will inspire people to act around the globe, around the state of California, around the United States, and we can't wait to act. And so I think we should be as bold as possible. I want to thank first Crystal Najir, all the consultants that have worked on this. I want to thank the stakeholder group that came together. I want to thank all the members of the public that came together today to give us feedback. Your feedback is very important. A lot of you are so committed to this issue and really help educate me and help educate others. And thank you for your commitment and passion. And I want to also thank the public for allowing us to focus on this and this being top of mind for you. It's already been talked about, you know, methane is lethal. The state of California started focusing on methane only several years ago. Carbon dioxide obviously is the most amount of greenhouse gases in the environment, in the atmosphere, but methane is second. And methane is 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. 80 times more potent. And I'm not going to get into all the air pollutant effects, but also burning methane in your house is not wise, and it's also dangerous. And now when we have made our homes that much more efficient and tighter, burning fossil fuels in your house is not wise, and it's dangerous. So we should be moving away from that, aside from the fact that methane is 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas at warming our planet than even carbon dioxide. So we should be doing everything that we can to eliminate this greenhouse gas. And I would say that you know, really, you know, the ordinance that we have before us is a very good ordinance. And I think that these exceptions, in some way, and I don't make this statement lightly, but in some ways it really does, in a way, you know, hollow out what we're trying to do. And so from my point of view, I think we should get rid of all the exceptions altogether. I certainly agree with the 1, 3, and 5, getting rid of those. But when you look at even 2, you know, limited application, you know, if you can define that, you know, sufficiently, maybe, but it's of limited application anyways. 4, limited application, but it's also wide open. Look at the language in that thing. 4, it's the request is based on a business related reason to cook with a flame. There's been alternatives in induction stovetops forever. These are cost effective. Michelin star restaurants, cooks are cooking on them. And I just think the exception is wide open, and it leaves it interpretation to many other people to say, oh yeah, this is necessary. I certainly agree with 5, but 6 again is wide open. Yeah, it's there may be more. There may be a cost in front of the meter, but it's going to be made up on many other levels. So from my point of view, it should be all of them eliminated, and I think that's consistent with what we should be doing today. But if the majority, if we're going to move with some of these, with the motion that's on the table, 1, 3, and 5, I can support that. And if we also had the direction that staff is to come back on 2, 4, and 6 with specific instructions, because we don't want a situation where somebody's saying, oh no, it's too costly, so then we're going to basically skip this and we'll allow you to put in this infrastructure, which is just going to be stranded infrastructure in the future. And again, I believe that this is cost effective. We have been innovating. There are products out there. There are alternatives, and it's cost effective. Just because somebody doesn't want to switch over, just because the developer may not want to switch over, that doesn't mean that there aren't cost-effective alternatives out there that are not going to put our residents at harm because they're breathing in the burning of methane, or that we're basically allowing for the burning of methane in our city. So I would, if I were king for a day, I would eliminate all of these exceptions. But I can support the motion that's on the table if we basically give specific instructions that 2, 5, and 6 are to come back with very narrow application.
Okay, thank you. And before I move to the next council member, who will be council member Lyons, it sounds to me like what you're saying, given how bold your statements are, that you want 1, 3, and 5 to apply across the board. You're not interested in saying that there are exceptions and that kind of thing for those who might be in the pipeline.
I agree with Crystal's comment. I think that in the planning stage, I think that there's a need for early on vesting and for those applicants to understand what the zoning allows them to do. If they're already permitted to build, then I think that you can't apply something retroactively. But if they don't have their permits to build, I'm not sure what we're talking about. If they're not if they're not vested in the pipeline in terms of the actual approval of their building, then we're perfectly within our right to ask them to change it. And again, these are cost effective. And so this is not adding a cost. And I would say that most residents this is going to be appealing to most residents. It's not going to be something that's detrimental to a developer, to future residents. This is going to be something that's helpful, that is appealing, that is healthy, and that we're doing our part here in the city of Encinitas.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor Blakespear. I just want to kind of sharpen the point a little bit. Councilmember Mosca said a lot of things that I agree with. And let me just reiterate that also 1, 3, and 5 exceptions be eliminated. This is going to come back to us, I understand. This is an introduction today. And so by asking for more information on exceptions 2 and 6, means we get to review more information before we make a decision on those. Can I ask that as a question? I think I understand that's what our process is, since this is just an introduction today. Is that correct?
I don't think that's correct, but let's go to the city attorney with their hand up.
Thank you. Yes, Leslie Devaney, City Attorney here. I was going to also let you know, and thank you, Member Councilor Lyons, for that question. While the exact science of determining whether or not changes to an ordinance are substantive or not, it's not an exact science, but if they're substantive, then you need to reintroduce the ordinance. And it's my opinion that if you add or take off exemptions, that's substantive, and that you would need to come back and reintroduce it. So to Councilmember Lyons' point, we would be coming back, and if the motion goes as I expect it's going to go in one way or another around the mayor's motion, and the vote goes that way, we're going to have to come back and introduce it with those changes.
Thank you for that clarification. That's the direction I'm seeing it going, by the fact that the motion is to remove exemptions 1, 3, and 5. Which then I will interpret as, when we get more information on exemptions 2 and 6, that we will evaluate those when the ordinance is reintroduced. And I think that's the right interpretation of that process. So if it's not, let me know. Let me just conclude by saying, I think from my 2 terms on the Environmental Commission, I've understood that our community is bold about where we want to go with the protection of our environment. And this is not an exception. I agree that a bold step is really important. And so that's why I'm in favor of the motion as it stands. I believe that one of the speakers, Dr. I think is Nisan, was talking about a teaching moment. And I've often looked at the things we do with that in mind, that we're in a position where we have the interest and we have the will to make a very strong statement. But it not only just makes a statement, it's a teaching moment for everyone who comes in touch with our city, everyone who works in our geographic area, everyone we are exposed to and our city touches. And I think there's a lot of value there too. So I'm not shy about being a leader. There's a few of these exceptions I want a little bit more information on. And in response to Councilmember Hinsey's question about when this will apply, it seems as though there should be, and there probably will be, a reasonable answer to that will not put a developer in the situation where they have to redesign based on permits they're already pursuing. I don't know that we know what the answer to that is right now, unless there's somebody on this call who can answer that. But I would hope that our practices as a city will not require people to rethink designs that are already in the permit process.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Krantz.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate all the effort that has gone into this. A lot of feedback from the community. I had meetings via Zoom with active members of our community and working real hard to come up with an ordinance that addresses the crises that we find ourselves in climate-wise. It does remind me that all my service on the city council has included Yeoman's efforts at addressing climate change with a top-notch climate action plan, and Crystal has been there through most of it. So it is greatly appreciated, the efforts that have gone into this and all other efforts related to the climate action plan. So this is just another important step, and it is also something that, in looking at this, it strikes me as a issue that deals with paradigm shifting, which is some of the most difficult work to do. So I heard from a real estate agent that she has clients that if they go into an open house and the kitchen is all electric, they turn right around. They don't bother looking any further. So we are indeed scratching at an issue that is pretty critical for the market in terms of real estate. I've had extensive conversations with my wife, who, really would find it difficult to give up gas to cook with. All my kids are the same way. So I have done my best to advocate this particular policy, and I think they see the urgency, but at the same time, it would require some changes that are not going to be easy. One question that I have is, would it be possible to remove the term exception and identify issues that it would be possible to apply for a variance on? Because that would establish an objective methodology for determining whether, for example, an ADU might not be constructed because it then would require, it would be a tipping point for electricity that would require new service by SDG&E, and it becomes cost prohibitive. And so if a potential ADU builder was to be faced with that choice, they may not build the ADU because of that requirement, and that might be useful to have a process for applying for a variance to this particular part of the code. So is that something, Roy, that would be workable, or is that not possible in these instances?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think it's a possibility, but my recommendation would be, if that's the route you're going to take, it's important that it's clear what are the findings to support a variance, if that's the path you go. It gives clear criteria on how to grant a variance.
Yeah, so you're saying that it could become difficult for city staff to make these determinations, or the process for what would qualify for a variance? Is that the challenge?
Yeah, that it's like, for instance, if for accessory unit, it would have to be clear, objective standards for staff to rely on in order to grant the variance.
Well, I agree that we could probably just eliminate 1 and 5. I just see, the purpose for the accessory dwelling unit exception to facilitate construction of ADUs for housing needs is pretty important. But I would like to make it a requirement that people prove that they can't wire their ADU without a significant investment. And I don't know what that number would be, but in the end, I would support the elimination of 1, 3, and 5, but I think that it's very likely in eliminating the exception altogether for ADUs, there will be some projects that don't get built. And I don't think that was the goal when we established our very convenient policies related to the construction of accessory dwelling units. So I think that it's important. This is very important. I think that the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that we're using a couple of terms somewhat interchangeably: electrification and decarbonization. And it's really important to acknowledge that we won't get to decarbonization until the electricity grid is powered with green energy, renewable resources. So we need to continue our efforts to make that happen here in Encinitas as well, which I know we're doing. And I just want to point out that it's a critical part of actually decarbonizing our electrical system here. So we need to keep up that work.
Okay, thank you. Crystal, can you just respond to the motion that's on the table in terms of the next steps for the 3 that we wanted to get more specificity and narrowing around, how you would go about doing that in a timeline?
Yeah, I would, of course, consult with our experts from EPIC, and I think that all of those 3 reevaluations would be doable. I think we could do it fairly quickly. potentially even by the anticipated next time that we were planning to come back to council, which was on September 22nd. I'll have to confirm that, but I think that that's doable. It's not much more analysis that would be done. It would, like you were explaining, it would be a tightening of, you know, what's feasible in terms of tightening and adding more specificity to those exceptions. I think it would be more of a, not so much an analysis, but maybe more of a crafting of the language that's along the lines of what you're proposing.
Okay, or like interpretive language or
Mhm.
or policy. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, it sounds like to me that there's a variety of opinion, but it sounds to me like we're basically, I think, there on the motion, and so I guess my recommendation would be the motion stand, and that if the seconder is still willing to second it, that then we move forward with this tonight.
Mayor, I just have a clarification, I guess, maybe for the city attorney as well, because the motion was, were you introducing the ordinance? Or we're gonna have to reintroduce the ordinance?
No, it's to introduce it. I mean, it's staff recommendation. I mean, yeah, we're having a public hearing, it's noticed. So we are introducing it, and 30 days later, it becomes effective when we vote again on it, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is Leslie. So because you're making changes tonight, it needs to come back as an introduction followed by an adoption. And then 30 days following the adoption, it becomes law. So the changes that you're making tonight, because they're substantive, you're actually taking out exceptions from what was noticed, that it needs to come back next time. And it'll be an opportunity to reintroduce it and also to further define 2, 4, and 6 as the motion stands right now, and then eliminate the 1, 3, 5 exceptions.
I
so
see.
It's a longer process.
Right. So the only thing that's possible in terms of the ordinance adoption is just as is. We don't have we can't do anything. We couldn't just eliminate the exceptions totally and move forward tonight with the adoption, or eliminate 3 of the exceptions. That's not actually possible.
That's correct, because it would be substantive. If you had something administrative like further defining essential facilities, that would be kind of an administrative clarification that is not substantive. But actually taking out an exception or putting in more exceptions would be substantive, and so you have to reintroduce it.
Okay. Well, so I guess that's where we are.
Okay. So the motion will be to direct staff to bring back the ordinance for reintroduction with the elimination of exceptions 1, 3, and 5, and narrowing the definition and application of exceptions 2, 4, and 6.
Right.
Is that correct? Okay.
Is the seconder still seconding?
Yes.
Okay. I think Tony's hand is still up from previously. It just hasn't gone down. But if that's wrong, let me know. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote. Thank you.
Okay, we have Councilmember Hensy.
Yes.
Councilmember Lyons.
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Crayons.
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Well, thank you again to staff and public speakers. We will move on to the next item, which is the 10B. This is parking amendments. So I will hand this over to staff.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, Roy Sabah, Director of Development Services. What's before you tonight? You see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure it's the right. All right. So what's before you tonight are 3 ordinances. We're introducing 3 ordinances tonight, proposing amendments to Title 30 of the Encinitas Municipal Code and the Local Coastal Plan.
Hey, Roy, could you go into full screen mode of the presentation?
And while that's happening, could I also just ask the city clerk, how many public comments do we have on this item?
We have 1.
Okay, thank you.
Is the full screen on? Just checking.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, it is, Roy.
It is now. Yes.
Thank you. So the proposed amendments before you tonight are to establish parking standards appropriate for different kinds of housing development, including transit-oriented housing development, inclusionary affordable housing, and tandem parking. The proposed amendments are to further implement the city's adopted 6 housing element. In our housing element, we have program 3A, which requires the city to establish parking standards appropriate for different kinds of housing. On June 8th, 2021, the Planning Commission considered all 3 ordinances and voted to recommend approval to City Council, which is what's before you tonight. First is the inclusionary affordable housing standards. Currently, the city does not have any parking standards for inclusionary affordable housing. The proposed ordinance provides a blended parking ratio, which utilizes both existing standards from the R30 overlay zone and the density bonus state law. The following table shows the existing parking ratios for density bonus and R30 overlay zone, and the blended parking rate, which was created by taking the lower parking rate of the 2. Next, we have the transit-oriented development standards. Just like the inclusionary affordable housing, there are no standards for transit-oriented developments in our municipal code. The proposed ordinance is providing that introducing a new standard for transit-oriented development. And transit-oriented housing development is defined by state law to be within a half mile of an accessible major transit stop. The city has 1 major transit stop as defined by state law at the Encinitas station. The proposed ordinance provides for a parking ratio for TOD or transit-oriented development consistent with the provisions included in the state density bonus law. Any housing development located within a half mile of accessible major transit stops shall provide 0.5 parking stall per unit. Additionally, staff is recommending an introduction of a definition for a major transit stop and transit-oriented housing development consistent with state law. We're also introducing an ordinance for tandem parking. The city's adopted regulations only allow tandem parking for detached single-family dwellings. The city has previously made the determination that through approval of a design review permit reviewed by the Planning Commission, a multi-unit housing development may request the use of tandem parking. This process is currently not codified and has been allowed through policy direction subject to discretionary review and approval. The new tandem parking standards will include only allowing tandem parking for all residential housing development, and the use of tandem parking shall only serve the same dwelling unit. We're also introducing clear dimensions, defined dimensions for both enclosed and unenclosed tandem parking spaces. We're also introducing requirements for screening when tandem parking is located within required side yard setbacks. We're also identifying key locations where tandem spaces can be provided. And lastly, to prohibit the use of tandem parking to satisfy guest parking requirements. The next step is should the City Council introduce all 3 ordinances tonight, we will come back on September 22nd with the adoption of all 3 ordinances. And then subsequent to the adoption, we'll submit the local coastal plan amendment application to Coastal Commission, and we're anticipating a hearing at the Coastal Commission sometime in the spring or summer of 2022. So with that, staff is recommending City Council introduce ordinances number 2021-10, 2021-11, and 2021-12. That concludes staff's presentation, and we're available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any hands, so let's go to the public comment. Oh.
Sorry, Mayor, since this is a public hearing, would you like to open the public hearing?
Yes, I'd like to open the public hearing.
Okay, and then we have 1 speaker, Christine Schindler.
Okay.
Okay, so as you can tell, I'm spending my evening with you tonight. So Christine Schindler, East Encinitas, I just want to say I was very happy to see this ordinance on the agenda. Whatever we can do to put people over cars and people over parking, and move transit-oriented development, TOD, forward, and affordable housing forward is wonderful. So I think this, speaks to a lot of things that the city is focused on as far as mobility, climate action, housing, and so forth. So I just want to say I'm in support of it, and I thank everybody for their efforts.
Great, thank you. And then Donna Westbrook had registered to speak, but she is not present. So that concludes speakers.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I was wondering if lift parking was considered in any of this. I know there was a project, a housing element project, that was suggested that lift parking would be a good solution. Is that something that has been considered?
Yes, the Planning Commission considered, we brought forward, or staff brought forward a determination item to the Planning Commission regarding that issue, and the Planning Commission voted against it. We're not supportive of utilizing lift or mechanical lift parking to satisfy parking requirements. That doesn't preclude somebody from using it, but it's just that they can't use it to satisfy their parking obligations.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you. I would like to move to approve ordinance 2110 tandem parking, 2111 transit-oriented development parking, and 2112 inclusionary affordable unit parking as presented by staff. I think it's really good timing, and I think it's a really good fit for our community. It really emphasizes people over dedicating space to storing cars, but I think it also is very lifestyle focused. In these certain circumstances, I think it's a good fit for our community, but I also think that staff has presented this in a way where it's a somewhat conservative. It's not like overstepping. I think it's the right fit for our community, and I think the state and all others will hopefully agree that this is the right way forward for us. So I'd like to put that motion forward.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Deputy Mayor Krantz, did you have another comment or? No. Okay.
Just not into lowering my hand very well.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
And then before we vote, we will close the public hearing.
And I will close the public hearing. Yes, thank you for the reminders.
No problem. Councilmember Hensy?
Yes.
Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Krantz?
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear?
Yes.
All right, motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Now we're on to item 10C, which is the Santa Fe Drive scope change. How many public speakers do we have on this
We have
side?
one speaker on that.
Okay, let's hear the presentation.
Good evening, City Council, Mayor, City Manager, City Attorney. I'm Matt Wadowski, Senior Engineer here at the City of Encinitas, and with me is Eric Torrenson. He is the project manager for our design contractor. We hope to think that last is best, so we'll get on, give you our update on Santa Fe Drive Corridor Improvement Project. Can you put the presentation up, please? There. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, most of you know that this Santa Fe Drive corridor has been around the city for a little while. It's kind of small little blocks to do this project, had different little places it's gone. But to give a basic background here, back in 2016, the city staff did apply for, and we did receive an ATP grant for Bonita to El Camino Real, the eastern phase, as we've called it, design and the construction funding, as you see. And then the city staff did apply for an HSIP grant on the western phase. And the main focus and area of this grant scope was for a signalized crossing and some sidewalk improvements. As that came around, we said we wanted to get a corridor project. And so we started putting all of this together. Next slide, please. Again, for a quick reminder to everybody, this is the corridor that we're talking about on the project. It's the same as attachment 1 in your staff report. The western phase starts with, we call it segment A, and it goes all the way east to segment F. Segments A and B are the western phase, which have the HSIP grant to support it. The eastern phase are segments C through F, which have the ATP grant, which support the project. Next slide, please. So once the grants were secured, the scopes and the costs that were received from that, this was the corridor project we had basically starting in 2019, if you would do it. The HSIP grant gave us the scope to build a signalized crossing, and it allowed us to put some sidewalks where sidewalks didn't exist, and to put some paint and striping on the ground to create some bike lanes where bike lanes didn't exist. That is the scope of what the HSIP grant gave us and is still giving us. On the ATP side, which is the eastern phase, again, the scope of the grant and the limits were from Bonita east to El Camino Real. It was to install sidewalks where sidewalks didn't exist. It was to install bike lanes with striping where bike lanes did not exist. We could add some curb ramps, and we could do some small swale improvements. So that is what the grants give us. And if you would ever ask the question, what do the grants fund on this project? This is what we wanted to say for everybody to understand. Next slide, please. As we brought the project to council, we combined it into an entire corridor project. We started meeting with the community. We brought it to city council. We talked with community members. We had outreach meetings with the school district liaison committee team, and we had some community focus groups where we started this, and we gathered other features which came onto the project, separated and protected bikeways where possible. It was specifically mentioned we wanted to do something with bus stops on both sides for the high school. We wanted the pedestrian crossing, which was funded by the HSIP grant. One of the things along the corridor was the intersection at Santa Fe Drive and Crest has always been known to be a difficult intersection. So we wanted to see if we could try to do improvements to it. And while we were going to be putting these features on the corridor, we knew we were going to have to comply with Green Street features in order to comply with state stormwater. And obviously the big thing we wanted to do was address connections to schools, which is why we started our communication and our liaisoning with those school districts where we could. Next slide, please. After the design contractor or the design consultant was brought on board, we started the design phase. We did our input with the school district liaison committee. We talked to community members. We had our interaction with some council members. We came up with our community requested design, or 30% as we called it. This is what we came about with in the beginning of this calendar year, February to March of 2021. And again, this is what we've had. We have protected bike lanes all throughout the entire corridor. We have a signalized crossing for the high school. We have two protected intersections at Nardo McKinnon and Bonita Windsor to go along, as well as the protected facilities all throughout the corridor. We're adding new sidewalks, as you see, in the red dot areas, and we wanted to put a scope for putting a roundabout at the Crest Santa Fe intersection. This is what we presented at the citizen participation plan. Some of you were on that call. I think you remember what we presented to the community. And one thing I also did want to say is during this time, we also did reach out to NCTD. They did see our 30% design, and we have established contact in order to do the bus stops in front of the high school. So we came here, this is the community requested the design that we really thought everybody really wanted. And it's a great design, but it is a little pricey. So when we got to that, we said, well, we got to look at this again. We do know the times we're in. Finances are tight. We need to be prudent. We have to think about this. And the last thing we wanted to do was to go forward if all of this couldn't be built and put some of the grant funding at risk, because the grant funding does have timelines. So if we don't spend it in enough time, we can lose it. So what city staff and the consultant sat down is like, maybe we need to come up with a value engineered project, slightly less, but something that can be designed and built within the time period we have. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to show you what we propose to do going forward with the project. It's a value engineered concept, and I will turn it over to Aaron for now. Next slide.
Thank you, Matt. So as a consultant, we worked with the city and looked at value engineering. What we wanted to do is to deliver 2 projects, the east and west, that provide the most important project features in a cost-effective manner. The important aspects of this is that we wanted to maintain separated bike paths, because in our public outreach, that was kind of a high aspect, safety at intersections. And so that's what we looked for in this revised value engineering. Basically, what we are providing now is we're still providing protected bike intersections from Gardena all the way to Ballur, and then from Ballur to Camino, there will be buffered bike lanes. Additionally, we're providing all the sidewalk improvements to make a sidewalk all the way along the corridor as previously discussed in the grant, and the safety improvements. In front of the high school, we wanted to maintain that same presentation that we provided. So the only minor modifications we did is eliminate some of the parking. Basically, there was some roadway expansion to allow parking on the north side, basically from the existing parking lot area over to Bonita. So that expansion and pavement was kind of reduced, and that was to help kind of save the cost, but we still plan for the same type, as you can see in this segment B here. And we still allow for the frontage parking, the back end angled parking along the segment B. And then we continue the segment C section. We continue with the separated protected bike sections through that. As we mentioned before, as we get to segment E, past Ballur, everything will be buffered, painted bike lanes down through segment F into El Camino. And then additionally on segment A, which is the frontage there, we'll provide new sidewalk. The sidewalk on the south side will be, and the bike path will be elevated at the same elevation. That was one of the changes to kind of help save cost. And then on the north sides, we'll have a AC curb with some striping, so that would be protected, but it won't be as landscape oriented on that north side, which becomes expensive because of all the cutting and additional construction to insert some of these items. Next slide, please. So in general, next slide. Okay, so in general, on the west end, we're looking at the protected bike lanes with the separators. In front of the high school, we're still allowing for some of the planting that we had planned before. This is just a kind of a graphic of showing what we have here. This is the general layout of the bike paths or bike ways, although we don't show any of the back-end parking, which would occur in front of the high school. Next slide, please. So, and then on the west, on the east end of the project, basically we'll be looking at a bike lane that has buffers. So we are looking for the 5 foot with a two foot buffer or so.
Can you orient? Are the trees on the north side or the south side?
So in this instance here, so this is just a typical graphic to show the actual lanes that we have and how the bike lanes are. There are some existing trees out there that will remain.
No, but I'm just trying to orient whether who's going what direction. So are the trees on the north side or the south side in this diagram? Because there were some differences between the curb and such like that, and I know there are projects coming on the south side, and so I'm just trying to orient myself to what we're looking at here.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is just in general, just a general cross section that doesn't identify where the trees are either on the north or the south side. So this is just a general section, mostly to focus on the safety improvements, which are the sidewalk and the bike lanes, or bike in this way, in this section be buffered bike.
Can you go to the previous slide?
This is not a real graphic is what he's saying, I think. Like on the east end, there are no trees between a sidewalk and a bike lane. I think that's what, like, you're just, right? Like, this is just a generic drawing that's showing that it's paint on the ground. But
Correct.
it's a little misleading because Tony is, I mean, that
Yeah.
was what I was thinking is like, where are we having this facility? But we're actually not having this facility.
So
yeah, the focus of this facility is the focus of this picture is for bike safety, to show how. So if you go up to the previous one, which is and this is what we say on the west end, these are protected bike lanes. So there's a solid buffer that prevents cars from driving into the bike path. So these kind of show both elements of it. The one that has a separated bike lane with a curb and water quality feature in between the bike lane and the driving lane, and then another alternative that we propose on the west end, which is to elevate the sidewalk and the bike lane at the same elevation, which protects any cars from hitting the bikes. So here we're just focusing on the bike safety aspect of these two elements.
And I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to understand. I want to make sure and I want the public to understand. You're saying this is primarily on the west end. So are we talking about like from Gardena to McKinnon / Nardo?
Yes. If you go back to the previous slide, go up one more. Okay. Yes. So, yes, from segment A, basically, that's kind of what we have in segment A is that first situation.
So
the difference,
if you go back to the next slide, then in that segment, you're saying there's enough room to put a sidewalk, maybe a planter thing, a bike lane, and a 2-foot drainage thing.
So in segment A right now, on the south side, which would be the left on this picture, is where we're expanding. So we're only adding the curb, the bike path, and the sidewalk at the same elevation. On the north side, we are basically putting instead of this nice swale here, we are putting an AC dike and striping to protect the bike lane. And then this on where the trees and sidewalk are, that would be the existing. That's in between. That's in between Gardena and Nardo. So in between Gardena and Nardo, the existing trees out there are actually the palms. So that's what we're showing. But now, if we go back up one more, so this is kind of like, if you go back up, back to the overall value and engineering section. So I think it's this. So then in segment B here, this is the one where on the north side, what we're going to do is right now where there is the mulch, we plan to add some vegetation and trees to that segment, but also add a bike path along that mulch adjacent to the sidewalk. Okay, so that's the plans for the north side. There'd be the vegetation that's added. On the south side, we plan to add a water quality buffer that would be curbed on both sides. That would be a separator between the back end parking and the bike lane. So it would go driving lanes, angled parking, bike lane, and then sidewalk. So that's what we plan for this section into here. So we do have plans to keep the vegetation, the landscape improvements along the frontage of the high school and the areas that we can that we're not using for the bikeway, and to add those trees in that area. Additionally, there will be a segment before Ballur where these apartments are, where we have enough room to actually have some additional swales and areas for some tree additions there too. And we also understand that the city has some tree grants and they can come in and add some to that. So that's part of the value engineering, and we're trying to maximize the cost and provide the safety, and then work in where we can still add in trees and landscapings with the knowledge that those can also be added in due time as that comes along. So I don't know if that helps understand what we're doing here.
Could I ask some clarification questions? I don't know if now's the right time, but I think other council members are. Is it appropriate? I know.
Okay with it.
You're okay with it, Eric. Thank you. I know it's sometimes hard when you've got graphics like this and you're kind of flipping back and forth between the blow-ups that kind of try to show some ideas. But may I just kind of zoom out for a minute and ask a few questions? First, this is what you're showing here is what's affordable. When you're saying, you know, this is what we're putting forward right now. This is affordable based on the budget we have right now, correct?
Correct, and the preliminary cost.
Well, let me just answer that.
Okay. Go ahead.
What we're showing here with the value engineer, if you follow the financing section of the agenda report, where we can afford the western phase, which would be segments A and B now, and with 2 sections of funding for the next 2 fiscal years, we can afford the eastern phase.
So A and B is what we have money for right now.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. I remember talking about this when we were looking at the project in the field, so that's how I was remembering it. So thanks for it's an important clarification.
Yes.
So when we're talking about sidewalk, we've got sidewalk on both sides of the road, both north and south, the whole extent, all the way from El Camino Real down to the 5. Is that correct? Based on all these different colored graphics, it looks like yes or no? Are there some gaps in the sidewalk?
We do have gaps in the sidewalk, and if we could switch to slide 11 really quick. So this is what's currently out there right now. So you can see that there's gaps in the sidewalk in certain areas. Then you go to the next slide, is with our project, these are the improvements we want. So we'll fill in all the gaps, provide the safe passages, and then also add in, as we mentioned, the mid-block crossing for the high school.
Okay, this helps.
Yes.
Thanks. I didn't realize you had more graphics. I should have waited.
Yeah, we do. So yeah, I mean, this is the easiest way to talk about what we're providing. The next question, I think, is what council member brought up, was the landscaping and where are the trees and stuff like that. And that's a little bit more difficult to show because there's some existing out there, and then you know, we want to focus, and originally when we met with everyone on this project and with the public, you know, everyone was really impressed with the portion in front of the high school. And so that's what we focused on in the value engineering, is keeping as much as we can and reducing some of the costs in front of the high school segments. And then we looked at, you know, where, since we are switching, so that's the other thing is since the cost to install protected bike lanes the whole way involved a lot more hard infrastructure for protection, that when we eliminated that to go to just buffered bike lanes to be more in line with the grant to save cost, that eliminated some of the opportunity to add those extra landscaping areas. So, you know, we went from adding little islands that could be landscaped to buffered paint. But we still provide some safety, because now instead of there not being, you know, where there was a shared lane that was shared, now there's a 5-foot bike lane with a 2-foot buffer, you know, or a 3-foot buffer. So there's still safety improvements there within reasonable cost.
Are the bike lanes continuous through the whole corridor?
So yeah, so if you go to the next slide after this, we kind of show you what we had before. So this one kind of shows the existing bike facilities, and this is where the existing bike lanes are. Of course, there are some shared use lane through this corridor. But then the next slide after that shows what we're planning to improve through this. So then you can see that we have the separated bike lanes pretty much up to Balleur. And then from Balleur down to Crest, we have the buffered bike lanes. And then we have the existing bike lanes from Crest down to El Camino. And actually, we're looking at adding a couple of feet of buffer right now to those existing bike lanes from Crest to El Camino. So yes, we are adding that. And then we're also planning for protected intersections that allow for the movement of people at Nardo and Bonita, are part of the safety improvements too. So we're looking at reducing the the cost of those to make them efficient, but still providing the protected designs at Nardo and Bonita. So for the bikes to cross.
One more question on this exhibit, if I could, and then I'll let my other colleagues talk. The separated bikeways, which is the class 4, that you showed in a couple different ways on the graphic, but maybe you didn't mean to. I mean, is there going to be a 6-inch curb on both sides of that protected?
So there's at a minimum, yes, at a minimum, there's going to be a 6-inch curb. Sometimes it may just be an AC dike with some striping because that's cost efficient for the area that we have and the room we have. And then, for instance, in front of the high school, though, it would be more of a 2 to 3 foot swale with curbs on both sides and landscaping in the middle. So it just depends. As we get past Bonita, basically as we go towards Evergreen, we still have it's separated from Evergreen to Ballure, though. We go to a more economical protected section, which is more of an AC dike separator with some buffer on it to save cost. Although we do have opportunity from Ballure, from Aloha to Ballure, or for that. I'm sorry.
If you have a graphic of the AC dike, I would appreciate seeing that.
We don't have a graphic of that. So we don't have a graphic of that.
Have you finished your presentation? Should we go through that and then get to questions? I see our director has her hand up. Did you want to speak right now, Lillian?
If I may, just so the designer is at 30% design. There are quite a few details remaining and outstanding to be developed as we move forward in the design process. It was at the 30% design that we realized and recognized that as much as this community deserves and wants a completely separated bike lane and many, many aspects and features of this facility, that to proceed with the design of that caliber would mean that there would be a delay in implementation. And so the purpose that we are here tonight is really to present what we believe we can phase and implement quickly and bring these facilities sooner. And what we've seen time and time again is the cost of construction is increasing year after year after year. And our ability to bring these projects to the table faster in phased and creative aspects will allow us to be able to materialize these projects. There is always an opportunity to add alternates and to, at the time that we go to bid, to see if we can afford additional facilities or change them. Tonight, I just want to emphasize that the team was focused on the safety of our students and our young people in the most focused areas where there are a number of schools. A number of students utilize this area to get to school. And so the choices that were made were driven largely in part by the community. And so the only thing I just want to say is that there is the opportunity to proceed with the original design on the table. However, we do not have the funds to be able to do that. The value engineered option that is before you this evening is an opportunity to bring this project to the table sooner. I just want to reiterate that because we bring this project today does not mean that in the future we could not add on to it or change it. Additional features couldn't be developed as separate projects later. So I just ask that you please keep that in mind as we complete the presentation. And that's all I had to add. Thank you.
Okay, let's try to get through the presentation, then we'll, in an orderly way, take comments and questions. So let's just move forward, Eric, with that.
All right, sounds good. Well, I think through the questions, we kind of flew through the slides that we had to show and discuss.
I can take it. Next slide.
Yeah, so there you go, Matt.
Okay, so as we said, we had our community preferred option, and then we've gone through the value engineered where we've reduced some things down. Just want to say right now, what we have available for construction is yes, the $3 million, and as I've said, the ATP grant as to be for the east phase, the HSIP for the west phase. So when we looked at just the grant funded scope of the project, you have a total of 2.95 million. Those are the two sides on each side to do it. The preferred alternative was obviously 7.7 million, as you see, 2.6 and 5.1. That's why after we got this design done and we looked at the cost, we said, wow, that's kind of big. So the value engineered option, as we said, the west phase is 2.3 million. And a correction to your staff report, the cost of the east phase is 2.7 million. That is the most recent number that we have for a cost of 5. As we've said, we have the $3 million now, and if we follow the funding schedule we put forth in the agenda report, we could achieve the construction of both projects. So those are the funding numbers. Next slide, please. So the time phase, obviously, if we get approval today for the scope change, we would go to the 60% design route around for comments. We're hoping to get to planning commission for the west phase and the east phase. The nice thing is the design of both phases can move at the same time. We want to complete the design by the end of 21 into 22 for the winter, complete the permitting in the spring of 22. From there, the right-of-way, we go with the west phase only. We finish the right-of-way. We start the construction in the summer of 22 for west phase because we have the money for that, complete it into early 23. We wait until the middle of 2023 to get the funding and start the construction of the east phase, and we can complete it by 2024. And this way, the grant funding is allowed to be used because we do have timelines, so everything can be funded properly with this scope and with the funding that was laid out. Next slide. Again, our recommendations, if you approve the value engineering design, looking for about an additional 1 to 2 million of the fund. It depends on what the bids come in at. Direct the staff to proceed with the value engineering for 2 phases. And then the timeline, as I said, if we approve, we would construct the western phase in summer 22. We would fund the east phase by 2023 budget, and we would construct the eastern phase in fall of 23. Next slide. Now we were happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Mosca.
Yes, thank you, Matt, and others for bringing this forward. I was excited I've seen this presentation, the presentation on the full Santa Fe corridor many times through the school district liaison meeting, and I know that there's a lot of energy and excitement around what's going to happen in front of SDA. But I got to say that I was excited by the combining of all the projects and the larger kind of view of the entire corridor. Being one of the only council members, I guess, as far east as I am, I'm keenly aware of the fact that we need to do a better job with our east-west feeders, making it as safe as possible for us to bike from frankly Liebenhain or New Encinitas over to the coast. We're doing a lot with our north-south feeders, but we have to be able now get people from Liebenhain and New Encinitas safely over to the coast so that they can enjoy those amenities as well. And so, one of the things for the Santa Fe was just one more kind of real, fixing up of that corridor. So it's another safe route for us to kind of meander from New Encinitas down ECR to Santa Fe. And I'd say that, you couldn't see it because the east side was kind of off your slide deck. It was kind of like at the very bottom of your slide deck, but that's okay. But you couldn't see it, but there were a lot of gaps there in terms of sidewalks, from Belor further east around several of those streets. I mean, you can't walk on those streets. There are no sidewalks at all and huge gaps. And it's really hard to ride your bike over there, even though we have, some facilities. And so bottom line is I'm happy with what you guys are doing because I do believe what Lillian said is true and correct. We need to deliver on some of these projects. We need to start value engineering. And my hope is that we can do the whole thing and then start adding, because we do need to add specifically to the east side, because not only is this creating the safe routes, do you have that kind of notion around SDA and some of the middle schools and elementary schools in that area, but also the notion of just improving our east-west feeders. And it's really hard on Encinitas because that road is like 50 miles per hour. And so Santa Fe is slower. Santa Fe is shaping up to be another really good alternative for folks to get to the coast. And so I would just, I support this, and I just want to move as quickly as possible to the eastern portion and really think about adding some amenities. Because I'd note that again, we have I don't know what the price differential is, but I know that you guys have done that, but like it's protected on the west side, but then, it's only buffered on the east side. It's just one more thing that kind of like, as we're putting money into Willow Spring, putting money into into ECR, I mean, being able to kind of take those folks onto Santa Fe and over to the coast is so important, and making it as protected as possible so that folks can do that is so important. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also supportive, and I really appreciate staff's ability to accelerate this project to get it closer to the completion or the initiation phase than we were looking at last year. And I will just say that we have a lot of support for doing this kind of a quick build style from the school district liaison committee meeting, because the trustees at San Diego Union High School District kept asking us about this crossing right there in front of the high school. And so I'm really happy that we're going to be able to deliver that more quickly, even though it might not have all the bells and whistles we'd had hoped. And I just had a few questions. So that signal at SDA, I keep seeing it referred to as a signal, but without flashers. So does that, what does that look like? It's not a rapid flashing beacon crossing?
We're working with that on that right now. There is some coordination internally with the city because there is a development to the south that may make it a full signalized corner port there, depending on how that development goes. But that is something that, as we proceed, we'll work out exactly what that is. Right now, we are looking for the most safe method to get people across. And so a signalized crossing, maybe not a full signalized crossing, but a signalized crossing with stops and with the actual stops for the cars to require is what we're looking at. So we're looking at something a little bit more than that. But,
okay, and would it have a refuge in the middle?
With it being a signalized crossing, we wouldn't need the refuge in the middle because it would be it wouldn't be like a flashing beacon where you cross and we want to turn, like a Z crossing with the refuge where you turn the people. This one would be a protected crossing is what we'd be looking at. So
okay.
We've also looked at some bulb outs to reduce the length and time that the pedestrians are in the road, so that shortens the distance as well.
Okay, that's great. That's what I was hoping for. And then I know that we're still at 30%, but these protected bike lanes, which I'm really in support of, and I think that will help us with our mode shifting goals. And it looks like we have this little curb for one of the proposals, and then we've got an elevated bike lane for another one with a 6-inch elevation. And I don't see any of the typical bollards that we usually use in the city for protected bike lanes. And I'm curious to know if we're going to, or if we just hadn't depicted that, or what the status is with bollards.
We can still add bollards. The community was about half and half. It's we wanted to make sure we got a little more input back. It's something that could be added. We didn't want to say no. We're not saying yes, definitely now. If council really likes them, we can certainly make sure we put them into the 60%.
Okay. And then my last question is about Sharrows, and if that's the same situation with Sharrows. I know oftentimes when a protected bike lane comes forward, we still have members of the fast cycling community that asks for Sharrows. Have we ruled that out, or is there still the possibility we could have Sharrows in addition?
Eric, we didn't put Sharrows on this one, did we?
We can add those. That's something that we're still discussing if it's needed or not, because most bikers sometimes they just ride in the street. But yeah, that's something that we can add. I believe our conversations were leaning towards having the Sharrows and the protected bike areas both.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. I think it would reduce some controversy when we're closer to the finish line.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Kranz.
I was afraid you thought I had left my hand up for no reason there. So, Matt, you mentioned communicating with NCTD. How are the communications going? What is the strategy for bus stops in this area?
we sent them our 30% plans, the community plans, and got a contact point. They sent us the standards and the specifications for which we need, and we basically established contact. We have what they want. Once we get the 60 to them, we're going to show both the bus stops in front of the school and have them provide any comments going forward.
Where is it moving to? What is the strategy?
The bus stops are going to be basically, if you're coming west, there'll be actually on both sides. It'll be before you get to the crossway. So if you're coming west, it's before you get to the signalized cross will be the first bus stop, and then if you're coming east, before you get to the signalized crossing, you'll have the bus stop. In really close proximity to 845 Santa Fe.
Is it going to be a bus stop like this, or are we going to have a bus turnout? Is there going to be a better facility, maybe with a bench and some shelter?
So we're going to have a bus turnout for certain.
Okay.
That's what we have currently in the design, and then it's up to the bus for them to determine if it's a shelter or not. I believe that's based upon riderships for their maintenance of those items.
Well, I think that the city could certainly, it's NCT isn't necessarily going to put it in, but I hope as a city council we support shelters and benches as we build this. I would hate to have this project short a bus bench. The crossing, signalized crossing, so maybe we're looking at something like we have at the Santa Fe undercrossing at Swami's. Is that the sort of thing that we might have, is push button and you get a walk and all the cars stop? Matt?
Eric, was that our most recent thing we had?
Yeah, I believe so. I haven't seen the one at Swami's. I'm not familiar with that. I haven't looked at that one, so I can't speak to that reference. But yes, it would be there'd be the bulb out. So basically you'd be crossing, you wouldn't have to cross the bike lanes or anything else like that. You'd just be crossing the lanes of traffic. And it would be, we're looking at currently right now having it as a signal stop there.
Yeah, and I wonder, the location of that, I hope everybody goes up and watches the morning and afternoon rush of automobiles, because if you put that crossing right here, you're going to impede traffic that wants to get into the high school parking lot. So maybe it's better a little further west, or maybe what you would be beneficial to everybody and more safe is if instead of a free left turn here, there was actually a left turn signal and maybe there was a right turn lane off of the street here. I know that gets a little dicey with bike facilities and such, but I hope that the engineers are all looking at that, because my 3 kids went to San Diego Academy, and when they didn't drive, I got to drive them up there, and it was challenging during those 2 periods a day. So I hope that we're thinking about that. And I did ride when I turned in my e-Golf at Cook Volkswagen. I took bus 304 to City Hall, and it was the bus that was full of high school kids from La Costa Canyon High School. And we got there at San Diego, and there were a bunch of bus riders that got off. And so it did point out that we need to have better facilities here, and I've been advocating for quite some time. And I think that it's always been kind of a back burner issue as this project developed. I know the school district liaison committee has been talking with folks. I assume they're thinking about buses, but I don't know. The other thing I would ask the city manager is that, when a presentation is given to one of the liaison committees or other committees that is staff presentation, that it be shared with all of us on the council so that we can kind of keep in touch with projects as they're moving forward, because I haven't seen this one in a long time, and it sounds like it's been presented to the school district and the school district liaison committee quite a bit. So I look forward to getting all these improvements done, and I just hope it's done in a very thoughtful way, and that we take advantage of this construction to address issues related to public transit as well as bicycling and walking. So thanks.
Just to clarify, Deputy Mayor, we didn't receive this presentation. We received the presentation, I believe, that the community received on the earlier community preferred alternative.
Okay, and again, I think that those are good to share. I did go and look. I went and looked at what the community saw as well. And that's where I started engaging on the issue of bus stops and where they should be placed. I think maybe the bus stops should be moved closer to Nardo McKinnon and use those crosswalks there. But if there's going to be a signalized, pedestrian crossing here, then I guess the bus stops can be in the vicinity of that. But when my kids were in school there was an effort to keep students from parking on Santa Fe Drive. They were supposed to go to the student parking lot, and I'm afraid what we're doing is we're creating an attractive nuisance for the young students. So to park on the south side of the street, but all that I'm sure is being considered, and so I look forward to getting this project built.
Okay, thank you. And before I go back to you, Councilmember Lyons, I'm just going to ask a question or two and make some comments. So with this, don't take this down quite yet, Councilman Deputy Mayor. So where is the mid-block crossing currently planned on this drawing? Or I mean on this map?
Just about where we are right now.
Here.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And so you're going to have a center left turn lane that's going to be full of cars and waiting to turn left into the parking lot. This was one of the requests that I made with my oldest student. This used to be a two-way driveway, and I asked them to turn it into a one-way and all exit here, entrance here, and it gets really busy. So I hope that the crossing doesn't impact that in some way. Maybe we don't care, but if the crossing is over here, at least people can continue to turn right into the driveway here. So if there's a way to avoid stopping both westbound and eastbound traffic from entering into the school parking lot, it seems like that would be good.
Absolutely. We'll definitely analyze it and make sure that everything works. And because we also know that there's a private development at 845. We've seen preliminary things. So whenever we say we've shown them what we want to do, but we did say we would tie into whatever they are conditioned to do. So there are a few pieces that we don't have all the answers to yet right now.
Okay. And so just to confirm, our design team who works for the city and is contracted by the city will go out there at traffic times of drop off and pick up and watch the way it's currently used, right? Has that happened yet? I know we've been in COVID and all this, but is that something that you plan to do or have done?
We've done
yes.
some of it, and go ahead, Eric.
Oh no, I was going to say yes. That is planned. As you mentioned, it was difficult to get a good read during the times of COVID, but now with the school year starting, as we go into this 60% design, that is something that we're looking, to review and get into.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to emphasize that I see that as imperative, that all the things that the deputy mayor is describing about the way this corridor is used. I also have kids the same age. I drive this corridor every day, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it is imperative that you go out there at the time when people are using the school on foot, on transit, on bicycles, with cars, and sit there and witness it. Because otherwise, I don't think you can just design this in a vacuum. You have to see what it is, what is the traffic pattern currently, and how can we add these improvements in ways that really benefit, but don't create other problems that have just been mentioned. So I really, I seriously hope that's taken to heart by everyone, from the city manager on down, to make sure that happens.
Absolutely.
So I just want to add a couple of big picture thoughts of things that I think are really important. First of all, I'm thrilled that you're value engineering this. I really think that should be the focus of all of our capital improvement projects. So what is the amount of grant money we have? What can we build immediately, basically in the short term, and not get onto a Lucadia streetscape like 15-year redesign, reconsideration. We don't have the money, all of that. I think this is a much, much better way to do it. And I really appreciate the staff of having the discipline and reorienting to say, let's do it. Let's do what we can with the money we have. So just want to recognize that and thank Lillian and the team, Matt, and the entire team for doing that. The buffered bike lanes are key. So to the extent you can create buffered bike lanes through, barrier protected bike lanes are key. I said that wrong. Buffered bike lanes are not the same. And this does have high high volume and high speed, especially at certain times of day. So to the extent you're able to value engineer those protected bike lanes by having candlesticks and bollards, I really encourage you to do that as you're moving forward from 30% to 60%, because there's just no question that there are so many students using this corridor, and having mode shift goals be effective means people have to be protected from the speeding vehicle. That's like the single biggest thing to feeling safe riding a bike, is that you're not going to get run over by a car. So, you know, just, I want to reemphasize that. I say that at every meeting we're talking about stuff like this, but it's just important for this corridor, especially as well. I also want to mention that it seems like there's substantial data that shows that intersections are the places where people have the most interactions, like car versus bike is when there's or pedestrian too, is when they're crossing. And so these intersections being protected and having pork chops and having all these new things, Dutch and all this kind of different, the new things that we're doing with intersections. I hope that we're applying those. It seemed like you were just in the description of them. You didn't go into the intersection specifically, but you know, what is happening at that McKinnon, Nardo area, kids just flow through that intersection at all times when the school is in, because that's the corridor, you know, to get there. So making sure those intersections are as good as possible on all four corners, I think, is a priority. I support the deputy mayor about bus stops. If we need a little more money to put a bus bench and with a cover for shade in, I think that I'm happy to make that a priority. I also hope and intend, and hopefully Councilmember Lyons is going to be working on this with the plant policy. This is a great place to have shade trees. This is a really hot corridor. We're not trying to, you know, protect people's views or anything. Having kids walking to school, and we're not in like a huge heat island, you know, planting shade trees is really important. So when we are planting trees as part of this project, I hope that that's considered. I know in the last project on Santa Fe, when we buried the power lines, they planted all palm trees that provide no shade and are expensive to maintain. And, you know, I really hope that we don't plant just scraggly little trees, but actual shade trees. And then the last thing that I want to say as my comments is that, well, actually I have two more comments. The candlesticks or bollards, I think, are very effective at creating a visual barrier. So for a driver to be driving down and see those candlesticks coming up, it does, you know, they're just less likely to drift over there. So I think of that as effective, subtly effective at communicating the barrier. And so, you know, I know there are mixed feelings about the visual effect of it, but there's just no question to me that they add safety. So to the extent those are part of it, I totally support that. We also have them throughout the city. So it's not, you know, it's not like this is the first application of the bollards or the candlesticks. And then my last comment is that that east side part of this project is really important because, and my family lives in this area of Cardiff that comes across this entire corridor, and you don't have to go on Santa Fe to get to almost anything before Lake, because you can go the back way. You can go through the Encinitas Community Park, you can go travel along Lake and even travel along Crest. But then that section, that last section, which is the east section, to get from Santa Fe to El Camino Real, you have to get onto Santa Fe. There are no other back routes that can get you down onto El Camino Real. And so that section is totally unimproved, like totally unimproved, where the bike lane is, you know, the pavement's wearing away and it's in the dirt and there's no sidewalk. And, you know, it's just, it's like the 1950s kind of street. And so I really do hope that we continue to keep this project, the east side of it, as part of a priority that we build this. Because if we, as Councilmember Mosca said, if we want people to be coming from the east side, you have to go on El Camino Real and then getting onto Santa Fe. That section right there is just really important. So I do care about that and hope that we get to that and don't let that somehow fall off of the plan. So those are my comments. Thank you very much for this project, for moving forward with something. I'm excited about where we are with it, and I really look forward to it getting built. So hopefully our final comment is from Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Matt, and your team for problem solving and coming up with a good solution here. what we can afford is essentially that west side in front of the school. I get that. That's its own first phase. And then future funding, as Mayor Blakespear has said, we hope we can do that too. And so that would be the East End. And so I like the approach you've used, and it's not easy to do this. So I just wanted to thank you and your team for that. My colleagues have asked all the questions I had except for one, and that is about the parking along the corridor. I believe you've got parking identified, and it might be reverse in. I just want to make sure I understand what the parking solution is along this corridor.
Yeah, for section B, which is mainly in front of the high school, yeah, on the south side, it's a reverse in parking. On the north side, where you're going west, for most of it, it's the reverse, and then, but we stop it after the school entrance until you get to Bonita. Eric, anything else?
Yeah, there is. We are keeping some of the parallel parking in between, I think, Evergreen and Ballur. Right now, there's an extended gap where we keep the parallel parking on the south side while adding in a swale and some water quality treatment aspects there.
Well, you're doing a lot.
Is the best place for the angled parking, and then everywhere else is pretty much parallel because we didn't have as much right of way. But segment B is really nice and wide, so we said let's try to use as much as we can.
All right, thank you. I know we'll see more details on that as you get beyond the 30%. And so I don't believe there's a motion that's been put forward yet. So I'll go ahead and move the recommended action to authorize city staff to modify the project scope for the design and construction of Santa Fe Drive Bike and Pedestrian Improvement Project.
I'll second.
Then Mayor, we do have a public speaker before we vote.
Okay, let's call on.
That is Christine Schindler.
All right, thank you very much, since I'm holding on with you all. So a lot to unpack here, but it's a fantastic project. It's a east-west corridor that's in need of some improvements. It's bikeable, walkable now, but it's going to be so much better after this project. So for safe routes, it's huge. For connectors, it's huge. So there was nothing said about travel lane width. I'm hoping it's 10 to do traffic calming by having a more narrow travel lane. Shade trees, thanks for mentioning that. There are a lot of good things that were mentioned. I think the biggest change in the project is taking the roundabout away from Crest, and that's probably what the $2 million difference is. So hopefully that can be done sometime down the road. If you can buffer from there down to El Camino Real, that would be an improvement over how it is right now. But I ride this all the time, and it's pretty comfortable for the road riders. Councilmember Kelly, thanks for bringing up Sharrows. Sharrows are not for bicyclists. Sharrows are to tell the motorists that bicycles can be there. So you're going to have a lot more success with this project, not having the road cyclists get up in arms if you build Sharrows into the project. So what else? There were other mentions. Councilmember Joe mentioned that this is a much gentler corridor than Encinitas Boulevard. However, I think Encinitas Boulevard needs some traffic calming as well, and I think that should be able to be a bike corridor. So it's kind of not one or the other. I think we need to do both. But this is fantastic. I know I forgot to mention a few things, but it's late, so you guys want to vote and move on. So thank you very much.
Are we ready to vote, Mayor Blakespear?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Councilmember Hinsey?
Yes.
Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Krantz?
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for that item. So let's see. We don't have any council member initiated items. Any reports pursuant to 1, 2, 3, 4 that people want to do? Okay, Deputy Mayor.
I am sorry, but I think this is pretty important. So a couple of things. One, I had a North County Transit District meeting in July on the 22nd, and we did a couple of things that I think are pretty important. One is we took action to establish priorities at North County Transit District as it relates to the regional transportation plan. And the key change, as far as I was concerned, was to take quality of life improvements like grade separations and pedestrian facilities and move them from a 10-year priority to a 5-year priority. So that was the highest. We did 5, 10, and 15-year priorities. So quality of life is now in the highest priority for NCTD, and it's our hope that Sandag will agree that it's important to focus on addressing quality of life issues. The other action we took is we approved a change to the coaster schedule that will happen in October, and we're going to be making changes that will increase the frequency significantly. The number of daily weekday trips from 22 to 30, summer Friday trips from 26 to 30, winter Friday trips from 22 to 32, summer Saturday trips from 12 to 20, winter Saturday trips from 8 to 20, Sunday trips from 8 to 20. And there's an improvement in the schedule, and it's going to make it essentially about every hour there'll be a coaster. So we're working hard. We've got the new locomotives. We're refurbishing the coach cars. So it's an enjoyable ride, and we're doing everything we can to encourage people to leave their car at home and to travel by coaster. The other thing that we have done is we've established an agreement with Metrolink to allow operability of our trains and their trains in our service areas. So there will be a train that will be offered, a coaster train that will go as far north as Anaheim, and it's going to be focused on opportunities to see an Angels game, or when the Olympics start, we're going to be able to provide some train service up north to some of those Olympic events that are going to be coming up. So it was an important agreement. It's been discussed for many, many years. And Mr. Tucker, the CEO there at NCTD, worked with Metrolink to finally get that in place. So it will give people an option that I think is pretty important in terms of expanding the use of public transit. So some good things we got done, and that's it.
Thank you. That's important stuff to share. I appreciate you doing that. Okay. Anyone else want to share anything quickly? Okay. So do we have an update from our city manager, our city attorney report, or city clerk report?
Mayor, just real quick, we do have an unscheduled vacancy on the Traffic and Public Safety Commission. This is the at-large representative, so it just means you have to be a registered voter and reside in the city of Encinitas. And applications are available online, and the deadline for those applications is Thursday, September 9th.
Okay, great, thank you. All righty. Well, our next meeting is on August 25th, which is next Wednesday, 2021. With that, we are adjourned.
Good night.
Night.